When the Red Riders motorcycle gang decided to pressure the methodical farmer who refused to join their protection scheme, they thought Thomas Reeves would be another easy mark. What they didn't know was that his perfectly aligned irrigation systems were plotted with the same strategic precision he once used to plan battalion movements across the mountains of Kosovo. For 5 years, this unassuming farmer had transformed struggling land into the region's most efficient agricultural operation. But beneath his quiet demeanor lay a past written in military strategy and tactical brilliance. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist rolls across endless acres of corn, painting patterns that stretch like tactical grid lines across Thomas Reeves' immaculate fields. His careful footsteps through the crops mirror the same measured pace that once carried him through war-torn villages and mountain passes during NATO operations. Every row on Evergreen Valley Farm stands with military precision, spaced with an exactness that local farmers attribute to expensive GPS technology. They don't realize it's the same strategic mind that once coordinated complex military operations. Across 3 continents, the distant rumble of farm equipment breaks the morning silence as Lisa Martinez, Thomas's lead agricultural engineer, approaches in her utility vehicle. Her young face carries the focused expression of someone who's learned to read both soil conditions and her employer's subtle shifts in demeanor. She's one of the few who've noticed how his equipment placement creates perfect overlapping coverage of all approaches, and how his morning inspections follow the same methodical patterns that military strategists use to assess terrain. "Morning, Mr. Reeves," Lisa calls out, climbing down from her vehicle. "Moisture readings are optimal again. Still can't figure out how you always know exactly when to adjust the irrigation." She doesn't mention how she's noticed his watering. Schedules seem to coincide with his pre-dawn observations from the old water tower, the highest vantage point on the property. Thomas continues his methodical inspection, each movement serving multiple purposes. To untrained eyes, he's checking corn height and soil composition. Lisa knows better. She's watched him catalogue every vehicle that passes the property, noting engine sounds and timing patterns with the same attention he gives to crop rotation schedules. "Nature gives us patterns," Thomas replies softly, his voice carrying that peculiar quietness that makes people lean in to listen. "You just have to know how to read them." His hands move through the corn with gentle precision, the same hands that once coordinated multinational military operations that rewrote the boundaries of modern warfare. The morning light catches the silver at his temples as he works, illuminating a face that carries its years with dignified purpose. Every movement, though appearing casual, serves a function. His position keeps the access road and both field approaches in view. His stance relaxed but ready, speaking of habits formed in places where awareness meant survival. Lisa moves closer, watching him assess a section of corn with microscopic attention to detail. "Still amazes me how you turned this place around," she says. "Everyone said this soil was dead 5 years ago. Now we're producing yields that agricultural universities want to study." A truck engine rumbles in the distance, and Thomas's hand pauses momentarily in the corn. His eyes track the sound's direction, measuring speed and vehicle weight from engine tone with unconscious precision. "Just Derek," he says softly, "bringing the morning equipment delivery." Lisa forces herself to relax. She's noticed how he always knows whose vehicle is approaching, cataloguing engine sounds like others memorize voices. "You always know who it is," she observes carefully. "Every engine has its signature," Thomas offers with a slight smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Small farming community. You learn the patterns. The barn door creaks open as James Torres, the farm's equipment manager and a former army ranger, emerges carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Like all of Thomas's employees, he moves with the same careful awareness that marks their employer, eyes checking angles, back never to an open space. "Morning, boss." James sets 1 mug on a fence post. "Sheriff Wilson called, says he needs to talk to you. Sounded important." Thomas's hand stills momentarily on a cornstalk, a pause so brief most would miss it. "Did he say what about?" "Something. About trouble over at River's Bend. Bunch of bikers causing problems at Mason's place. Called themselves the Red Riders." The morning light seems to dim slightly as Thomas processes this information. His movements remain measured, but Lisa, watching closely, sees something shift in his stance. A subtle change from farmer to something else, something harder. "James, take over the field inspection. Remember what I taught you about checking. The north section." Thomas's voice carries that quiet tone they've all learned to recognize, the voice of a man who sees more than he says. Lisa watches him move toward his truck, each step placed with the unconscious care of someone who spent a lifetime moving through hostile territory. The morning sun catches his profile, and for a moment she sees something in his face, a shadow of the man he must have been before, the man he might need to be again. "Mr. Reeves," she calls after him. He pauses, turning slightly. "The Red Riders. Should we be worried?" Thomas studies her for a moment, measuring not just her question, but her readiness for the answer. "Not yet," he says finally, "but it's good to stay alert, good to remember that peace isn't just the absence of trouble." He moves toward his truck with fluid grace. "Be ready when trouble comes." The truck's engine turns over with a familiar rumble as Thomas heads toward town. In the fields, Lisa watches him go, understanding for the first time that the precision she's always admired in him isn't just about farming excellence. It's something else, the patience of a strategist at rest, the focus of a man who knows that sometimes the skills that make you effective at war are the same ones that help you protect what matters most. The morning sun climbs higher over Evergreen Valley Farm, its rays catching the perfect rows of corn that stretch toward the horizon like soldiers standing at attention. But Lisa's eyes remain on the dust trail of Thomas's departing truck, remembering how her grandfather, a veteran of Desert Storm, once told her that the most dangerous military leaders weren't the ones who charged into battle. They were the ones who could wait, watching, measuring, calculating, until the moment's strategy meant more than strength. The farm's irrigation system hums to life on its automated schedule, a schedule Lisa now realizes might serve more than just agricultural purposes. Above, a red-tailed hawk circles the fields, scanning for prey with patient precision, a silent reminder that nature's most effective strategists are often the ones that watch and wait. The midday sun beats down on River's Bend's Main Street as Thomas Reeves's truck rolls past Mason's farm supply store. The shattered display windows and spray-painted warnings across its facade tell a story that makes Thomas's jaw tighten imperceptibly. He parks with a clear view of both street approaches, habit making him note possible exit routes and defensive positions before stepping out. Mason Fletcher, a weathered man in his 70s who supplied local farmers for 4 decades, sweeps broken glass with mechanical precision. His hands shake slightly, though his face maintains the stoic expression common to men who've weathered countless storms, both natural and man-made. "Happened last night," Mason says, as Thomas approaches, not looking up from his sweeping. 5 bikes, custom choppers. Said they represented new business interests in the area. His voice carries the weight of contained anger. "Made it clear. My prices were about to go up for my own protection," they said. Thomas studies the broken glass pattern, noting impact points and trajectories with the same attention he once gave to analyzing enemy movement patterns. "They'll be back," he says quietly, eyes scanning the street while appearing to focus on the damage patterns. Always the same approach. Start with the suppliers, work their way to the farms. Lisa Martinez's warning from that morning echoes in his memory. 3 bikes had passed Evergreen Valley Farm before dawn, riding slow, studying approaches. Thomas had watched them through his old field glasses from the water tower's vantage point, noting details that most would miss. Modified suspensions riding high, suggesting hidden storage capacity. The distinctive engine modifications that spoke of vehicles built for more than just transportation. Sheriff's overwhelmed, Mason continues, his broomstrokes becoming more aggressive. 4 counties reporting similar incidents, Red Riders moving in systematically, targeting isolated properties, pressuring businesses. Nobody's seen anything like it. Not nobody, Thomas replies softly, remembering similar patterns in distant provinces where warlords established control through calculated intimidation. They're following a playbook, testing responses, identifying weak points, isolating targets before moving in force. A motorcycle's rumble echoes off Main Street's buildings, the sound modified for maximum intimidation. Thomas registers the engine's pitch, calculating speed and direction without seeming to pay attention. 2 bikes pass slowly. Their riders, leather cuts displaying the Red Riders emblem, a crimson stallion rearing against a black backdrop. They rev their engines deliberately while passing Mason's store, a reminder that last night's violence could easily repeat. Thomas notes their riding patterns, the practiced way they maintain tactical spacing, the subtle hand signals that speak of military training gone wrong. These aren't common thugs playing at being outlaws. They're organized, disciplined, dangerous. Heard they visited Edward Thompson's place yesterday, Mason says, once the bikes pass. Offered to buy his East Field. When he refused, his irrigation system mysteriously failed. Parts shortage, they said. Nothing available unless he reconsiders their offer. Thomas's hand rests on a shelf of farming supplies, his fingers unconsciously measuring distances between potential cover points. They're mapping the area, he observes, learning who's vulnerable, who will resist, building pressure points. Peter, Chen is already sold out. Mason's voice carries bitter disappointment. Said he couldn't risk his family. Can't blame him the way things are going. He pauses in his sweeping, finally meeting Thomas's eyes. They'll come to your place too. Premium soil, strategic location, access to 3 county roads, perfect for whatever they're planning. Let them come, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes Mason look closer at his most methodical customer. Something in Thomas's stance, in the controlled precision of his movements, suddenly reminds Mason of his own time in the service of men who carried themselves with the same contained readiness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lisa Martinez's utility vehicle appears at the end of the street, her arrival exactly on schedule for their regular supply run. Thomas notes how she approaches. Careful speed, good situational awareness, following the security protocols he's quietly instituted over the years. She parks precisely where he would have chosen, maintaining clear lines of sight. Mr. Reeves, she calls out, climbing down from her vehicle. We've got company at the farm. 3 bikes watching the north entrance. Torres is keeping an eye on them, but... She trails off, reading the situation at Mason's store. They've started here too. Time. To make some decisions, Mason says heavily. These people, they don't stop at property damage. Next time might not just be windows. Thomas moves toward Lisa's truck with measured steps, each movement calculated and precise. Already made them, he replies softly. 5 years ago, when I chose this land. His eyes track another pair of motorcycles passing across the street, cataloguing details for future reference. Some things are worth protecting. Some lines have to be drawn. He opens the truck's door with the same careful efficiency he once used to plan multinational military operations. Mason might want to hold off ordering new windows for a few days. Way things are going, it could be a waste of money. As they drive back toward Evergreen Valley Farm, Lisa glances at her employer's profile, noting the subtle changes in his usually calm expression. They're not going to leave us alone, are they? No, Thomas replies, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Men like that, they mistake patience for weakness, careful planning for easy targets. His hands rest perfectly positioned on the steering wheel, reminding Lisa of how he'd once adjusted a satellite mapping system to plan irrigation layouts with military precision. But we're not an easy target, she states, remembering all the subtle security measures integrated into the farm's operations over the years. The carefully maintained sightlines disguised as agricultural necessity, the strategic placement of equipment and structures that suddenly takes on new meaning. No, Thomas agrees softly as they turn onto the farm's access road. We're not. We're just giving peace every chance to prevail first. The evening sun catches his profile, and for a moment Lisa sees past the quiet farmer to something else. Someone who hasn't forgotten how to end conflicts decisively. Someone who's learned that sometimes the best way to avoid war is to be very, very good at winning it. Ahead, Evergreen Valley Farm's fields stretch out in mathematical precision. Every row, every structure, every defensive position, carefully planned and maintained over 5 years of patient preparation. The Red Riders think they're sizing up a simple farmer. They don't realize they're being sized up by someone who spent 20 years ensuring that when he moved his forces, they only needed to move once. From the highest point on his property, the old water tower, Thomas watches 3 more Red Rider motorcycles cruise past his southern boundary, their 4th pass today, each time riding slower, studying approaches, looking for weaknesses that don't exist. They're getting bolder, James Torres observes, joining Thomas in the tower's upper observation post. The former Army Ranger's voice carries the weight of combat experience. Counted 12 different bikes today. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Thomas adjusts his field glasses slightly, checking specific angles he's measured and memorized over 5 years of patient preparation. They think they're establishing dominance, he replies softly. Actually giving us everything. We need to know about their operations. Below, Lisa's truck returns from town, following the security protocols Thomas instituted years ago. Varying routes, unpredictable timing, constant awareness. She's learned well, he notes with quiet approval, just like she learned that his insistence on precise GPS mapping of every field had purposes beyond agricultural efficiency. Got news from River's Bend, Lisa reports, climbing the tower's stairs with the same careful movement patterns Thomas has quietly taught all his key employees. 3 more farms sold out to their investment group, the Wilson Place, Green Valley, Ranch and Old Peterson's South 40. They're creating a corridor. Thomas's hand remains steady on the field glasses as he processes this information. The pattern matches what he's observed. Systematic acquisition of properties along specific routes, building a network of controlled territory. They're not just taking land, he notes quietly, remembering similar patterns from his military days. They're selecting specific properties, creating infrastructure for something bigger. What? James asks, though his tone suggests he already suspects the answer. Distribution network, Thomas replies, remembering similar patterns from his NATO operations. They're building a smuggling corridor. Each property they acquire becomes a waypoint, a safe house, a storage facility. His voice carries that deadly quiet that makes his employees straighten unconsciously. And our farm sits at the perfect crossroads. Lisa moves to the tower's western window, maintaining clear sight lines, just as Thomas taught her. That's why they want our land so badly. We're the missing piece in their network. A truck engine. Rumbles on the access road, wrong timing for regular deliveries, unfamiliar engine sound. Thomas's hand adjusts the field glasses with strategic precision, focusing on the approaching vehicle. Black SUV, heavily customized, windows tinted well past legal limits. The kind of vehicle that tries too hard to look civilian. Right on schedule, he murmurs. They're following the same pattern they used in other countries. First the intimidation, then the show of force, finally the professional approach. His lips quirk slightly. Expensive suits come in to make a reasonable business offer. Want me to run interference? James offers, his stance shifting subtly to ready status. No, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that particular softness that they've learned means crucial instructions are coming. In time they see exactly who they're dealing with. He pauses, gaze never leaving the approaching vehicle. Lisa, get the agricultural production reports, the real ones, not the public numbers. James, make sure the Northfield irrigation system is armed for its secondary function. The SUV parks precisely where Thomas predicted it would, in what its occupants likely think is a tactically advantageous position. 4 men emerge. 3 with the heavy builds and alert postures of professional. Security, the 4th, moves with the calculated grace of someone used to wielding power through careful words and implicit threats. "Mr. Reeves," the man calls out, his voice carrying that practiced smooth tone that tries to blend authority with reasonableness. "I represent certain business interests eager to discuss the future of your remarkable operation," Thomas begins. His descent from the water tower, each movement measured and precise. To casual observers, he looks like a farmer coming to greet visitors. Lisa and James, watching from above, see something else. The fluid economy of motion that speaks of someone who spent years making sure every movement serves multiple purposes. "Interesting timing," Thomas replies as he approaches the visitors, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes the security men shift uneasily despite themselves. Most business representatives don't need armed escorts to make agricultural proposals. The man's practiced smile flickers slightly. "Insurance, nothing more. These are uncertain times, Mr. Reeves, which is actually why I'm here. We've been impressed by your operation's efficiency, your attention to detail." He gestures at the perfectly maintained field stretching to the horizon. "Our organization believes in rewarding excellence. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for your property." Thomas's stance shifts imperceptibly, adjusting to keep all 4 men in his field of vision while appearing relaxed. "Your organization," he observes softly, "the same one that's been pressuring local businesses, creating accidents at farms that refuse to sell, running Red Rider motorcycles past my property every 2 hours. The man's smile becomes more fixed. "You seem well informed about local affairs, Mr. Reeves. That's good. Shows awareness. The kind of awareness that should tell you which way the wind is blowing in this region." His voice hardens slightly. "Smart farmers know when to take a good deal before unfortunate circumstances affect their operations." "Interesting choice of words," Thomas replies, his voice carrying that quiet tone that makes even the security men look closer at him, something in his stance, in the precise way he holds himself, suddenly making them question their assumptions about simple farmers. "You have 24 hours to consider our offer," the man states, trying to regain his authoritative tone. "After that, well," he shrugs eloquently. "Agriculture can be a dangerous business. Equipment failures, irrigation problems, mysterious crop diseases. So many things can go wrong on a modern farm." Thomas's smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Yes," he agrees softly. "So many things can go wrong, especially when people mistake strategic thinking for vulnerability, patience for weakness." His gaze meets each man's eyes in turn, measuring, calculating, just as he once measured terrain and troop movements for operations others deemed impossible. 24 hours is fine. It's good to have deadlines, helps clarify the situation. As the SUV departs, Lisa and James rejoin their employer. Through their surveillance systems disguised as agricultural monitoring equipment, they track 6 more motorcycles, taking up observation positions around the property. They're getting bolder, Lisa notes, not even trying to hide their presence anymore. Pride, Thomas replies, watching the vehicles through his field glasses. Their leader's reputation demands escalation now, can't have a simple farmer resisting. His organization. His hand remains steady on the glasses as he makes minute adjustments. He'll push harder, faster, and try to break us before sunrise. The irrigation systems are ready, James reports. Secondary functions are armed, just like you designed them. Defensive positions confirmed. Everything in place. Thomas nods slightly, his attention never wavering from his observations. They think they're dealing with a stubborn farmer who needs to be taught about power and consequences. His voice carries that quiet certainty that makes his employees straighten unconsciously. Tonight they learn about different kinds of strength, about why some targets aren't what they appear to be. The evening deepens toward night as more Red Riders arrive at their staging area. Through their surveillance network, Thomas's team tracks increasing activity, weapons being distributed, communications equipment being tested, tactical gear being prepared. The gang's forces gather, believing they're preparing to overwhelm a simple agricultural operation. They don't realize they're being watched by someone who's turned an entire farm into the kind of strategic instrument he once used to coordinate multinational military operations. They'll come soon, Lisa observes, watching the gathering forces through their monitoring systems. Before full dark, they think they have the advantage of dusk. Yes. Thomas agrees softly, making final adjustments to his equipment. Their leader's pride won't let him wait. He needs to prove his reputation, show his people that resistance brings swift consequences. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Some lessons work both ways. Sometimes the teacher becomes the student. The sun touches the horizon, painting evergreen. Valley Farm's perfect rows, in shades of gold and shadow. To casual observers, nothing seems different about the quiet agricultural operation. But beneath the peaceful surface, years of precise preparation wait to teach unwelcome visitors why some targets aren't what they appear to be, why some skills never fade, and why some lessons are best learned before it's too late. Sheriff David Wilson's office smells of coffee and concern as Thomas studies the photographs spread across the weathered desk. Crime scene images tell a story of calculated violence. 3 farms in neighboring counties burned to the ground, their owners hospitalized, their land mysteriously purchased days later by shell companies. But it's the precision of the attacks that catches Thomas's attention. The systematic way security systems were disabled, the tactical approach to each property. Started 3 months ago in Madison County, Sheriff Wilson explains, his voice carrying 20 years of law enforcement experience and mounting frustration. Red Riders move into an area, establish presence through intimidation, then an investment. Group shows up making offers that can't be refused. He taps one particular photograph showing distinctive tire tracks in mud, but these aren't your typical outlaw bikers. Thomas's hand pauses on a specific image, one showing boot prints in spilled grain. Special Forces issue, he says quietly. A recent model, probably Delta based on the tread pattern. His finger traces another detail most would miss. See how they approach the building. Perfect tactical spacing, professional breach points. These aren't thugs playing soldiers. Wilson watches his friend closely, noting how Thomas's farmer's calluses don't quite hide older marks on his hands, the kind that come from years of handling tactical communications equipment. Got word from the FBI's task force yesterday. Red Rider's leader, a man called Victor Kane, goes by Commander, former Delta Force, dishonorably discharged, turned his training into a business model. Thomas processes this information with strategic patience, each detail catalogued and cross-referenced. Not just taking land, he observes, taking specific properties, creating corridors, building infrastructure for something bigger. And the task force thinks they're setting up a major distribution network, Wilson confirms. Each property they acquire becomes part of a pipeline. And your farm. He spreads out a map marked with recent property acquisitions. You're sitting right where they need their central hub to be. A motorcycle roars past outside, the sound modified for maximum intimidation. Thomas tracks it without seeming to move, measuring speed and direction with unconscious precision. 2 bikes, he says softly. Riding heavy, probably carrying. They're getting bolder. They're here in force. Wilson leans forward, lowering his voice. Got reports of 30 bikes moving into the old Johnson truck stop. That's just the advanced team. Kane himself is coming. Word is he wants to oversee this operation personally. Thomas's reflection in the office window shows no emotion, but his stance shifts subtly. The farmer's relaxed posture giving way to something more focused. Why? Because you're different, Wilson replies. Other farms, other businesses, they broke quickly. But your place, they've been watching you, Thomas. They know something's not right about how you run things. The precision, the security measures hidden as agricultural improvements, the way your people move. He pauses. Kane's not stupid. He knows he's not dealing with a simple farmer. And now, Thomas's voice carries that deadly quiet that makes even Wilson, who's known him for 5 years, look closer. Now they're planning something big. Got word they're bringing in serious hardware, military-grade equipment. They're not planning to negotiate anymore. Wilson hesitates. I can have state police here in force, FBI tactical teams on standby. No. Thomas's voice is gentle but final. Keep your people clear for now. This needs to end quietly. You're going to face them alone? Wilson's concern is evident. Thomas, I know what you can do, know what you were, but they've got 30 men, professional equipment, military training. Thomas turns from the window, his movements carrying that liquid grace that speaks of violence held in perfect check. Numbers don't matter much if you're counting the wrong things, he says softly. Kane's making the same mistake others made years ago, thinking that because someone chooses peace, they've forgotten how to end wars. They'll come at you hard, Wilson warns. Kane's reputation, his whole operation, it's built on never backing. And down on making examples of people who resist. Thomas moves toward the door, each step measured and precise. Some examples teach the wrong lesson, he replies. Kane needs to learn that some skills don't fade, they just wait quietly until they're needed. He pauses at the threshold. And some battles, once you're forced to fight them, only need to be fought once. When? Wilson asks simply. Soon, Thomas replies. Kane's pride won't let him wait. He'll want to make a statement, prove his reputation. His eyes scan the street with tactical precision, disguised as casual observation. Probably tonight. New moon, good cover of darkness. He'll think it gives him an advantage. You've been ready for this, Wilson realizes. All these years, all those agricultural improvements, you've been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Thomas's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Peace isn't just the absence of violence, he says quietly. Sometimes it's the presence of adequate preparation. He moves toward his truck with fluid grace. Keep your people out of it tonight. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, let it play out. Some operations need to stay quiet. As Thomas's truck pulls away, Wilson watches his friend go, remembering something he'd heard years ago about certain NATO strategists, men who could end conflicts before they began, who could coordinate operations that rewrote the rules of what was possible, who understood that sometimes the best way to prevent war was to be very, very good at winning it. The afternoon sun catches the sheriff's badge as Wilson considers calling in backup anyway. But something in Thomas's quiet confidence stays in his hand. He's seen his friend's farm, noticed things his law enforcement training helped him recognize. Sightlines masked as irrigation layouts, defensive positions disguised as equipment storage, precision measurements that had nothing to do with agriculture. For 5 years, Thomas Reeves has been building something that looked like peace to most observers. Tonight, the Red Riders would learn what Wilson had long suspected, that sometimes the most dangerous strategists are the ones who've learned to wait, to watch, to prepare. The ones who understand that victory isn't just about winning the battle. It's about making sure you only need to fight it once. The afternoon light casts long shadows across Evergreen Valley Farm as Thomas conducts what appears to be a routine equipment check. His movements, measured and precise, serve multiple purposes. Each inspection revealing defensive positions disguised as agricultural necessity. Each maintenance task activating systems designed for more than just farming. Lisa watches from the equipment barn's doorway, understanding for the first time why Thomas insisted on such specific placements for every piece of machinery. The combine harvester, positioned with perfect sightlines down the main access road, doubles as a hardened position. The grain augers, arranged in what seemed like efficient patterns, create interlocking fields of coverage. Even the irrigation systems control panel, which she's operated for years, suddenly reveals secondary purposes. The GPS mapping systems, she says quietly, watching Thomas adjust what appears to be a simple moisture sensor. They weren't just for precision farming, were they? Everything serves multiple purposes, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes her pay careful attention. Precision is precision, whether you're plotting crop rows or calculating other measurements. His hands move with practiced efficiency, checking systems that have waited 5 years for this moment. James emerges from the northern storage shed, carrying equipment that no longer pretends to be purely agricultural. Motion sensors are active, he reports, disguised as pest control systems, just like you designed them. Thermal imaging cameras masked as climate monitors are online. We've got coverage of every approach. Thomas nods slightly, his attention seemingly focused on calibrating an irrigation control panel. But Lisa notices how his adjustments correspond to specific ranges and angles she's seen marked on their topographical surveys. The drainage channels we dug last spring, she realizes. The ones you insisted had to be exactly that depth, exactly that pattern. Natural features make the best defensive positions, Thomas confirms softly, especially when they look like normal agricultural improvements. He straightens, scanning the horizon with sniper's precision, disguised as a farmer's casual observation. Kane will appreciate that once he realizes. A distant motorcycle's growl breaks the afternoon quiet. Thomas's hand pauses momentarily on the control panel, measuring sound and direction with unconscious precision. They're probing again, he observes, more carefully now. Kane's advanced teams testing responses. His lips quirk slightly. Learning all the wrong lessons from what they see, Lisa moves to one of the upper barn windows, maintaining the careful position Thomas has drilled into all his key employees. 4 bikes, she reports, moving in pairs, professional spacing. They're not even pretending to be random outlaws anymore. Pride, Thomas replies, his voice carrying years of observation of human nature in combat zones. Kane's reputation is built on overwhelming force, on breaking targets quickly. Patience isn't his strength. He moves toward the main house with that liquid grace that speaks of violence held in perfect check. Time to show him why it should be. Inside his office, Thomas accesses a hidden panel, revealing equipment that has nothing to do with agriculture. Tactical communications gear, surveillance monitors showing feeds from cameras disguised as routine, security systems, And in a locked case that hasn't been opened in 5 years, tools from another life entirely. "You're really ready for this," Lisa observes from the doorway, watching him check systems with mechanical precision. "All these years, everything you built here—" "Peace isn't passive," Thomas replies, his hands moving through equipment checks with practiced efficiency. "It's not just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of adequate preparation." He activates another system, and suddenly the farm's defensive coverage appears on multiple screens. Sometimes the best way to prevent violence is to be very, very good at it. James joins them, carrying reports from their perimeter sensors. "They're setting up at the old Johnson truck stop," he confirms. "Thermal imaging shows serious equipment being unloaded. Military-grade hardware, just like the sheriff warned." He pauses. "They're not coming to negotiate anymore." "No," Thomas agrees softly. "Kane's coming himself. His pride demands it. Now we've become a challenge to his reputation." His hands move over the communications gear, checking frequencies and coverage. "He'll want to make an example of us." "How many?" Lisa asks, studying the sensor readings. 30 confirmed, probably more coming, James reports. "They're setting up a proper tactical operation, professional equipment, coordinated communications, planned approaches." He pauses. "They're not coming to negotiate anymore." "You've taught us well," Lisa observes, watching their defensive network come fully online. All those training sessions disguised as agricultural procedures, all those drills masked as equipment maintenance. "Knowledge stays sharp through practice," Thomas replies, making final adjustments to their surveillance coverage. "Skills don't fade if you use them regularly, even if you use them differently." He straightens, scanning their preparations with tactical assessment disguised as farmers. Diligence. Kane thinks he's dealing with a simple farmer who needs to be taught about power. Tonight, he learns about different kinds of strength. Through their surveillance systems, they watch more motorcycles arrive at the truck stop, their riders unaware that every movement is being monitored by systems designed by someone who spent 20 years ensuring that when he moved his forces, they only needed to move once. Kane's forces gather, believing they're preparing to overwhelm a simple farmer who's defied their power. They don't realize they're being watched by someone who's turned an entire farm into the kind of strategic instrument he once used to coordinate multinational military operations. Rivers Bend's main diner sits at the crossroads of County Road 23 and Old Mill Highway, its windows reflecting the setting sun like weathered mirrors that have seen too much. Thomas arrives 10 minutes early, parking his truck where it gives him clear views of all approaches. The diner's usual evening crowd is noticeably absent, leaving only Marie, the silver-haired waitress who served coffee here for 30 years, moving between empty tables with deliberate calm. Through the window's reflection, Thomas notes 4 motorcycles strategically positioned around the building's perimeter, their riders maintaining professional spacing, the kind that speaks of military training rather than outlaw posturing. 2 more bikes arrive, their engines modified for intimidation, but their riders showing the disciplined movement patterns that reveal their true background. The bell above the door chimes as Marie approaches his booth, coffee pot trembling slightly in her weathered hands. "Evening, Thomas," she says, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. "Busy night ahead?" "Could be, Marie," he replies softly. "Might want to take your break early. Been a long day." She hesitates, understanding his real meaning, then nods slightly and moves toward the kitchen. Thomas positions himself with clear sightlines to all entrances, his relaxed posture masking combat-ready awareness. The door chimes again as Victor Kane enters, ducking slightly under the frame, 6 feet of tactical precision wrapped in expensive, casual wear, his presence filling the space like an approaching storm. A Delta Force tattoo peeks from beneath his rolled sleeve, the precision of its lines suggesting recent service rather than distant memory. "Mr. Reeves," Kane's voice carries that peculiar smoothness that tries to blend authority with reasonableness. I appreciate you agreeing to this conversation. Two more men enter, moving with military precision to flanking positions. Thomas doesn't bother looking at them, his attention focused on Kane's hands, on the subtle signs that tell him everything he needs to know. Your choice, Thomas replies quietly. Though private conversations usually work better with fewer observers. Kane slides into the booth, his size making the space seem smaller. His eyes, cold grey under precisely trimmed hair, study Thomas with predatory interest. Remarkable operation you've built, Kane begins, his voice carrying practiced appreciation. Precision farming at its finest. Every detail is perfectly calculated, every element serving its purpose. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Almost like it was designed by someone who understands the importance of exact measurements. Someone used to calculate variables with exceptional accuracy. Thomas sips his coffee, noting how Kane's security team maintains perfect positioning despite appearing casual. Most farming is about precision, he replies. Nature rewards careful attention to detail. Indeed, it does. Kane leans forward slightly, his bulk casting a shadow across the table. Just like other professions we might have in common. Professions where precision means the difference between success and... He pauses meaningfully. Failure. Outside, more motorcycles arrive, their engines cutting off in synchronized precision. Kane's smile widens slightly at the sound. You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Reeves. Other properties, other operations, they understood the changing situation quickly and accepted generous offers. But your farm, your operation, resists normal market pressures. Some things aren't for sale. Thomas sets his coffee down with precise care. Everything's for sale. Kane's voice drops lower. Just a matter of finding the right motivation. We've studied your operation, you know. Fascinating setup. Those irrigation patterns, those equipment placements. His eyes narrow slightly, almost like someone with tactical experience designed them. Someone who understands fields of fire, interlocking coverage, defensive positions. Farming requires planning, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes Kane look closer at him. Good layout makes everything more efficient. Kane's laugh carries no humor. Yes, let's talk about efficiency, about precision, about the kind of skills that don't show up in agricultural records, but seem to inform every aspect of your operation. He leans forward again. We know what you are, Mr. Reeves. The question is, are you ready to accept reality, or do we need to demonstrate why resistance is inefficient? Thomas meets Kane's gaze steadily. Interesting choice of words, efficiency, precision, resistance. His voice softens further, almost like someone remembering lessons from another life. Basic Delta Force training, wasn't it? Before things went wrong. A flicker of surprise crosses Kane's face, quickly masked. You've done your homework. Details matter, Thomas replies. In farming, in strategy, in understanding who's really sitting across the table. Kane's expression hardens. Then you understand what's coming. 30 men, military-grade equipment, professional operation. Your farm might be well-designed, might have some surprises waiting, but numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie, Thomas agrees quietly, but they can teach the wrong lesson if you're measuring the wrong things. Is that supposed to impress me? Kane's voice carries growing irritation. Some old NATO wisdom. Not wisdom. Thomas rises with liquid grace. Just information, since we're sharing details. He moves toward the door with measured precision, each step placed with unconscious care. Some land isn't for taking, some people aren't threatening, and some decisions... He looks back, meeting Kane's gaze with eyes that have seen more battles than the younger man can imagine. Some decisions you don't get to unmake. Something in Thomas's tone makes Kane look closer, really seeing him for the first time. Not just the quiet farmer, but something else, something in how he moves, how he watches, how he holds himself with that peculiar stillness that speaks of strategies held in perfect check. "You have until sunrise," Kane calls after him, trying to regain his authoritative tone. "Accept our very generous offer, or learn why the Red Riders don't take no for an answer." Thomas pauses at the door, his voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "Sunrise is fine. Good to have deadlines. Helps everyone understand exactly what time the lesson begins." Outside, the Montana evening paints long shadows across the parking lot as Thomas walks to his truck. He can feel eyes on him, not just the bikers, but Marie watching from the diner's kitchen, locals observing from distant windows, all of them wondering if the quiet farmer remembers how to deal with men who only understand force. The truck's engine turns over with familiar precision as Thomas pulls away, leaving Kane standing in the diner's doorway. The Red Rider's leader watches him go, his face troubled by something he can't quite name. Something about the way Thomas moved, the way he spoke, the way his eyes held secrets that smelled like classified operations and distant conflicts. What Kane thought would be so simple suddenly feels more complicated. The target he assumed would be easy has revealed edges that whisper of dangers best left sleeping. But pride built on violence knows only one direction: forward, regardless of the warning signs. By sunrise, the Red Riders will learn whether the quiet farmer breaks like the others, or if they've awakened something that should have stayed buried in the shadows of old wars. Lisa Martinez stands in Thomas's command center, her agricultural engineering degree suddenly taking on new meaning as she studies satellite imagery and tactical displays that have nothing to do with farming. "These systems," she says quietly, "they're not just agricultural monitoring equipment, are they?" Thomas adjusts several screens, each showing different aspects of the farm's defenses. "NATO taught me something valuable," he replies, his voice carrying that particular softness she's learned to recognize. The best strategy isn't about having the most resources, it's about using what you have in ways your opponent doesn't expect. James Torres enters, carrying a tablet displaying thermal images of Red Rider patrols. "Just like Kosovo," he observes, his Army Ranger experience helping him read the tactical situation. "You're not just defending the farm, you're shaping the battlefield." "Every field we planted," Thomas confirms, his hands moving over control systems with practiced efficiency. "Every structure we built, every piece of equipment we positioned, all of it designed to look like normal agriculture while serving another purpose." Lisa studies the displays with growing understanding. The irrigation systems that seemed so precisely engineered for water conservation now reveal their true nature. Carefully planned fields of fire disguised as agricultural necessity. Equipment storage positions that she thought were arranged for efficiency show themselves as hardened defensive positions, each covering specific approaches. "5 years," she says softly. "You've been preparing for this possibility for 5 years. "Not just preparing," Thomas replies, his attention focused on a screen showing Red Rider movements. "Teaching, training, building a team that looks like farm workers but understands so much more." His eyes meet hers. "Your degree in agricultural engineering, it wasn't the only reason I hired you, was it?" Lisa remembers her interview 5 years ago, how Thomas had noted her minor in systems analysis, her ability to understand complex patterns. "You saw something else. The same thing I saw in James's military background, in every person we brought onto this farm. People who could learn to see patterns, understand systems, think strategically, while appearing to focus only on agriculture. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces continuing to gather at the old truck stop. Professional operators establishing positions, setting up communications networks, preparing for what they believe will be a straightforward assault on a stubborn farmer. They still don't understand what they're really facing, do they? James observes, watching the tactical displays. No, Thomas agrees, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes his team focus intently. Kane's thinking like a Delta Force operator. Overwhelming force, superior firepower, tactical dominance. He's fighting the kind of battle he understands. But that's not the battle you've prepared for, Lisa realizes, seeing past the surface operation to the deeper strategy at work. Thomas's smile doesn't reach his eyes as he makes final adjustments to their systems. NATO operations taught me something crucial. When you're facing a superior force, you don't try to match their strength. You make their strength work against them. His hands move over the controls with practiced efficiency, each adjustment precise and purposeful. Kane thinks he's preparing to teach us about power, actually giving us exactly what we've spent 5 years preparing for, a chance to teach him about strategy. Through their surveillance systems, they track more red. Riders arriving, their numbers growing as Kane calls in reinforcements from other chapters. Each new arrival, each piece of military-grade equipment, each tactical position they establish, all of it falling perfectly into patterns Thomas has spent years preparing to exploit. "Sir," James reports, studying new thermal images, "they're setting up forward observation posts, establishing communications relays, positioning heavy weapons teams. Professional operation, exactly by the book." "Yes," Thomas agrees softly, "following exactly the tactical doctrine they were trained in, making exactly the moves their experience tells them are right." His voice drops lower. "Not seeing that. Sometimes the most dangerous trap isn't the one that opposes your strength. It's the one that uses your strength against you." Lisa watches the tactical displays with growing understanding. Every Red Rider movement, every position they establish, every advantage they think they're creating, all of it orchestrated by someone who spent 20 years ensuring that when he moved his forces, they only needed to move once. "We're not just defending against an attack, are we?" she asks, finally seeing the full scope of Thomas's strategy. "No," he confirms quietly. "We're teaching a lesson about the difference between tactical thinking and strategic understanding, between force and precision." His hands move over the control systems with measured efficiency. About why some skills never fade, they just wait quietly until they're needed again. A new alert flashes across their screens, more vehicles arriving at the truck stop. Through their thermal imaging, they watch specialized equipment being unloaded, the kind that speaks of serious military connections. "Those aren't just motorcycles anymore," James observes, his military experience helping him identify shapes in the thermal imagery. "That's professional gear, night vision, tactical communications, the kind of equipment that doesn't show up. In civilian markets, Thomas studies the feeds with focused attention. Kane's not just calling in bikers, he's activating his real network. Former operators, military contractors, people who understand professional operations. His fingers trace patterns on the tactical display. See how they're moving. That's not biker gang behavior, that's military precision. Lisa looks closer at the screens, seeing what Thomas means. The new arrivals move differently. Disciplined, coordinated, their movements speaking of serious training. "How many were like Kane?" she asks. "How many took their training and turned it wrong?" "Too many," Thomas replies, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "After the NATO drawdown, after budget cuts started hitting special operations units, some men couldn't adjust to peace, couldn't handle not being at the tip of the spear anymore. He adjusts several monitoring systems with practiced efficiency. Kane's not just running a biker gang, he's built himself a private military company disguised as Outlaws." James nods in understanding. "That's why his operation's so effective. He's not recruiting thugs, He's recruiting operators who've lost their way. Yes, Thomas confirms softly. Men who understand military operations, who know how to plan complex missions, who can coordinate multiple units toward a single objective. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Men who think exactly like I hoped they would. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces continuing to establish their positions. Each unit moves with professional precision. Each team takes exactly the positions their training tells them are tactically sound, none of them realizing they're following patterns Thomas has spent years preparing for. Show them, Thomas instructs, and Lisa brings up new displays, detailed maps of the farm and surrounding area overlaid with tactical analysis. Years of careful preparation revealed in precise calculations and strategic planning. These patterns, she says, studying the displays with growing comprehension. The way you laid out the irrigation systems, positioned the equipment, even planted the crops. Each element of the farm's design suddenly reveals its deeper purpose. Kosovo taught me something valuable, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes his team focus intently. When you're facing an opponent with superior resources, you don't try to match them strength for strength. You turn their own doctrine against them. He brings up another display, this one showing detailed analysis of military tactical procedures. Every professional operator is trained to respond to specific situations in specific ways. When they encounter certain conditions, their training tells them to take certain positions, to make certain moves. You've been preparing for exactly those responses, James realizes, seeing the deeper strategy at work. 5 years of careful preparation, Thomas confirms. Every aspect of this farm is designed not just for agriculture, but to channel professional operators into exactly the positions we want them to be. His hands move over the controls with measured precision. Kane thinks he's bringing overwhelming force to a tactical engagement, actually walking into a strategic trap 5 years in the making. Lisa studies the tactical displays, seeing how each element of their defense has been carefully planned and prepared. That's why you insisted on such precise measurements for everything: field layouts, equipment positioning, even the drainage patterns. In NATO operations, Thomas explains, adjusting several monitoring systems, we learned that terrain is more than just geography. It's about understanding how your opponent will react to specific features, how their training will compel them to respond to certain situations. He brings up another display, this one showing detailed analysis of the farm's defensive capabilities. Every position Kane's forces are taking, every tactical advantage they think they're establishing, all of it carefully designed to look like normal agricultural features while serving our strategic purposes. Through their surveillance network, they watch more of Kane's professional operators arriving, each unit moving with military precision to establish what they believe are tactically superior positions. None of them realizing that every move they make follows patterns Thomas has spent years preparing for. Sir, James reports, checking new sensor data, they're beginning their final equipment checks. Kane's got them running full tactical diagnostics, establishing synchronized communications nets, coordinating their assault timing. Everything by the book, Thomas observes quietly. Following exactly the procedures their training demands, implementing exactly the protocols they're comfortable with. His voice carries that particular softness that makes his team straighten unconsciously. Not realizing that sometimes the most effective trap isn't in opposing your enemy's strength. It's in making sure their strength serves your purpose rather than theirs. The evening sun casts long shadows across Evergreen Valley Farm as Thomas completes his final systems check. Through his command center surveillance network, he watches Kane's forces settle into their positions around the truck. Stop. Each unit believing they've established tactical superiority, their professional operators following textbook perfect protocols. All teams report ready, Lisa announces, monitoring multiple communication channels. Defensive systems activated, countermeasures in position. Everything you planned for is in place. Thomas studies his tactical displays with strategic patience, each screen showing another aspect of Kane's carefully established operation. They've committed fully now, he observes quietly. 120 personnel, heavy weapons, tactical vehicles, everything they have positioned exactly where military doctrine tells them it should be. Through their surveillance systems, Kane's voice carries the satisfaction of a commander who believes he's achieved absolute battlefield control. Complete isolation established. No way in, no way out. Time to show Reeves what happens when you challenge professionals. Thomas's hands move over his control systems with practiced precision, making final adjustments to equipment that has waited 5 years for this moment. Pride makes men predictable, he says softly, makes them focus on the battle they know how to fight instead of seeing the one they're actually in. Lisa's screens show Red Rider units completing their deployment, implementing textbook perfect siege tactics, professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated communications. Everything exactly according to military doctrine for this type of operation. They think they've trapped us, she observes, watching multiple tactical displays. Think they've established complete battlefield dominance. Yes, Thomas confirms quietly, which means it's time to show them why some traps work both ways. His fingers move across the controls with surgical precision. Initiate Protocol 7. What happens next unfolds with choreographed precision. Across the perimeter, Red Rider units suddenly find their tactical advantages dissolving. Communications equipment encounters precise interference patterns. Night vision gear receives carefully calibrated light bursts that blind without seeming deliberately targeted. Surveillance systems show exactly what Thomas wants them to see. Oh, what's happening? Kane's voice carries the first edge of uncertainty. Report status, all units. But his carefully established command and control network begins experiencing systematic disruption, not complete failure. That would be too obvious but precise degradation that creates confusion without revealing its source. Eastern sector is compromised, James reports from his monitoring station. Just like you planned, sir. They're adjusting positions exactly as predicted. Through their surveillance systems, they watch Kane's forces respond to the perceived vulnerabilities. Each unit moves according to tactical doctrine, adjusting positions to compensate for what they think are accidental weaknesses in their perimeter. They're following standard protocol, Lisa notes, tracking multiple unit movements, reinforcing what they think are weak points, redistributing forces exactly as their training tells them to. Yes, Thomas agrees, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes his team focus intently, making exactly the moves they're trained to make, taking exactly the positions we've spent 5 years preparing for them to take. The afternoon sun catches his profile as he coordinates the precise application of pressure across Kane's perimeter. Each disruption, each apparent vulnerability, each tactical challenge carefully designed to elicit specific responses from professional operators following their training. "Sir," one of Kane's unit commanders reports urgently, "we're losing cohesion in multiple sectors, can't maintain proper coverage patterns. Something's wrong with our tactical grid." "Impossible!" Kane's voice carries growing frustration. "We've got this place completely surrounded. Reeves is isolated, contained. He can't possibly be affecting our entire perimeter." But across their siege positions, Red Rider units continue encountering precisely engineered difficulties. Not dramatic enough to seem deliberately caused, but systematic enough to degrade their tactical effectiveness. Every piece of equipment, every communication system, every surveillance device experiencing exactly the kind of problems that force professional operators to adjust their positions. "They're moving into secondary positions," Lisa reports, watching the tactical displays. Exactly where you predicted they would. The positions we've prepared specifically for them. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces implement textbook-perfect responses to what they perceive as tactical problems. Each unit adjusting according to their training, each commander making exactly the decisions their experience tells them to make. Reeves! Kane's voice carries barely contained fury. Whatever you're trying won't work. We've still got you completely surrounded, still got overwhelming force, still control this battlefield. Control, Thomas replies softly into their tactical frequency. Interesting choice of words. But control isn't about having the most forces, or the best positions, or the superior firepower. His hands move over the control systems with snipers. Precision. Control is about understanding exactly how your opponent will react, exactly what moves they'll make, exactly what positions they'll take when pressured in specific ways. The afternoon deepens as Kane's perfect siege operation continues experiencing systematic degradation. Not enough to make them abandon their positions, but precisely enough to force them to adjust, to adapt, to move exactly where Thomas has spent years preparing for them to be. You still don't understand what you're really fighting, he continues, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that makes even hardened operators pause. Still thinking this is about tactical positioning, about firepower, about traditional military superiority. A pause. Not realizing that sometimes the most effective response to siege warfare isn't in resisting the siege. It's in making sure that when your opponent thinks they have you surrounded, they've actually surrounded themselves. Through their surveillance systems, they watch Kane's forces continue responding to precisely engineered tactical pressures. Each unit following their training, each commander making professional decisions, each adjustment taking them exactly where Thomas wants them to be. The siege of Evergreen Valley Farm continues, but the nature of the engagement has fundamentally shifted. Kane thinks he's maintaining tactical superiority despite unexpected difficulties. He doesn't realize he's experiencing exactly the kind of systematic pressure designed to make professional operators move exactly where someone wants them to be. Pressure designed by someone who spent 20 years ensuring that when he moved his forces, they only needed to move once. Sir, James reports, monitoring multiple sensor feeds, their eastern units are completely out of position now. Western sector's communications are degraded exactly as planned. Northern teams have lost effective coordination with their support elements. Thomas watches the tactical displays with focused attention, seeing his years of preparation beginning to bear fruit. Kane's still thinking like a Delta Force operator, he observes quietly. When you encounter problems, you adjust. When positions are compromised, you adapt. When systems fail, you implement contingency protocols. All exactly as you predicted, Lisa notes, watching Kane's forces continue to respond exactly as their training demands. Because that's how professional operators are trained, Thomas confirms softly. When faced with tactical problems, you follow established procedures. When encountering systematic difficulties, you implement standard responses. His voice carries that deadly quiet that makes his team focus intently. Not realizing that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who fights your strength, it's the one who turns your strength into vulnerability. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane coordinate increasingly desperate attempts to restore tactical cohesion. Each command, each adjustment, each professional decision taking his forces deeper into Thomas's carefully prepared trap. Reeves! Kane's voice carries growing rage across their tactical frequency. You think a few equipment malfunctions, a few communication problems will stop us? I've got 120 professional operators ready to reduce your entire operation to ashes. Numbers, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that makes even his own people focus intently. You're still thinking about numbers, still counting forces and equipment and tactical advantages. A pause. Still not understanding what you're really facing, what 5 years of patient preparation really means. The command center's main screen shifts to thermal imaging of Kane's forward positions. Thomas watches with focused attention as their carefully orchestrated disruptions continue to fragment the Red Rider's tactical cohesion. "Sir," Lisa reports, studying multiple data feeds. "They're trying to coordinate a communications reset, switching to backup frequencies, implementing emergency protocols." "Yes," Thomas confirms softly. "Following standard military procedures for electronic warfare countermeasures." His hands move over the control systems with practiced efficiency. Not realizing that we've spent years preparing for exactly those responses. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's technical teams deploy sophisticated communications gear, attempting to cut through what they believe is simple electronic interference. Each piece of equipment, each countermeasure, each professional solution only serving to deepen their tactical vulnerability. "Look at their movement patterns," James observes, his military experience helping him read the situation. "They're repositioning their heavy weapons teams, trying to establish new fields of fire to compensate for their communication problems." Thomas nods slightly, his attention never wavering from the tactical displays. Kane's falling back on his Delta Force training. When primary systems fail, you adapt. When positions are compromised, you adjust. When standard approaches don't work, you improvise. But every adjustment takes them deeper into our prepared positions, Lisa realizes, watching the Red Rider units continue to shift and reposition. "Because that's how professional operators think," Thomas explains, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that speaks of lessons learned in distant conflicts. "They're trained to overcome obstacles, to adapt to changing conditions, to find solutions to tactical problems." His smile doesn't reach his eyes, not trained to recognize when those very solutions are part of someone else's strategy. A new alert flashes across their screens, Kane's forces beginning to deploy additional equipment. Through their thermal imaging, they watch specialized vehicles move into position, their profiles speaking of serious military hardware. "They're setting up mobile command posts," James reports, studying the thermal signatures. "Trying to establish independent tactical networks to bypass their communications problems. Standard protocol for this type of situation," Thomas observes quietly. "When your primary command and control network is compromised, you decentralize. Break down into smaller, independent units that can operate autonomously." He adjusts several monitoring systems with practiced precision. Kane thinks he's adapting to our disruptions, implementing professional solutions to tactical problems. His voice drops lower. "Actually following patterns we've spent years preparing for. Moving his forces exactly where we want them to be." Through their surveillance network, Kane's increasingly frustrated voice carries clearly. "I want every unit operating independently. Each team leader has full tactical authority. If you can't maintain communications with command, implement emergency protocols and engage at will." He's losing strategic coherence, Lisa notes, watching the Red Rider units begin to operate more independently. Their coordinated operation is fragmenting into individual tactical engagements. "Yes," Thomas agrees softly, "because that's what professional operators are trained to do when they lose central command and control. Break down into smaller elements. Maintain tactical effectiveness through individual unit actions." His hands move over the controls with measured efficiency, not seeing that sometimes the most dangerous trap isn't the one that stops you from fighting, it's the one that makes you fight exactly how someone else wants you to. The afternoon light catches Thomas's profile as he coordinates another series of precisely calibrated disruptions. Each interruption, each malfunction, each tactical problem carefully designed to trigger specific responses from professional military operators. "Sir," one of Kane's unit commanders reports urgently, "we're picking up multiple thermal signatures across the farm. Can't get clear readings. Something's interfering with our imaging systems." "Because they're seeing exactly what we want them to see," James observes, watching their countermeasures take effect. Every piece of equipment they deploy, every system they activate, just gives us more ways to shape their tactical picture. Thomas nods slightly, his attention focused on the tactical displays. "In Kosovo, we learned something crucial about modern military operations. The more sophisticated your equipment, the more you rely on technical systems, the more vulnerable you become to precisely engineered disruption. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces continue to respond exactly as their training demands. Each unit implements professional solutions to what they perceive as tactical problems. Each commander makes textbook-perfect decisions based on their military experience. Each adjustment takes them deeper into Thomas's carefully prepared strategy." "Reeves!" Kane's voice carries growing desperation across their tactical frequency. "You think a few technical problems will stop professional operators? We're trained to fight in any conditions, to adapt to any situation." "Yes," Thomas replies, quietly. "That's exactly what you're trained to do, exactly how you're conditioned to respond, exactly the patterns your experience tells you to follow." His voice carries that deadly quiet that makes even his own team focus intently. Not understanding that sometimes the most effective strategy isn't in stopping your opponent from fighting. It's in making sure that every way they choose to fight serves your purpose rather than theirs. Lisa studies the tactical displays with growing comprehension, watching Kane's forces continue to fragment and adjust. "Their whole operation is transforming," she observes, "from a coordinated siege into exactly the kind of dispersed, independent tactical engagements you spent years preparing for. Because that's how professional military operators are trained to handle this type of situation." Thomas confirms softly. "When you lose central coordination, you adapt. When communications are compromised, you decentralize. When standard approaches fail, you improvise." His hands move over the control systems with strategic precision, not realizing that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who stops you from implementing your strategy. It's the one who makes your own strategic doctrine become your vulnerability. Through their surveillance systems, they watch Kane coordinate increasingly desperate attempts to regain tactical control. Each command, each adjustment, each professional decision based on years of military training and experience. All of it playing directly into patterns Thomas has spent 5 years preparing to exploit. "Sir," James reports from his monitoring station, "their western units are completely out of position now. The eastern sector's command structure has broken down. Northern teams are operating independently, no coordination with adjacent forces." Thomas watches the tactical displays with focused attention, seeing his years of preparation beginning to achieve their purpose. "Kane's still thinking like a Delta Force operator," he observes quietly. "Still trying to solve what he thinks is a tactical problem. Still implementing what he knows are professional military solutions." His voice carries that particular softness that makes his team straighten unconsciously. Not understanding that sometimes the most effective trap isn't the one that prevents you from using your training. It's the one that makes your training become the very thing that defeats you. Through their surveillance network, new thermal signatures appear at the truck stop. Kane's forces are deploying additional equipment, each piece more sophisticated than the last. "They're bringing out their serious hardware now," James observes, studying the readings. military-grade signal analyzers, electronic warfare suites, advanced tactical coordination systems. Kane's committing his full technical resources, Thomas confirms quietly. His professional pride demands it. Can't have his sophisticated operation being systematically dismantled by what he thinks are simple farming disruptions. Lisa adjusts several monitoring systems, bringing new data streams into focus. There, technical teams are implementing military-grade countermeasures, she reports, trying to cut through our interference patterns, establish secure communications networks. Yes, Thomas agrees, his hands moving over the control systems with practiced efficiency, following exactly the electronic warfare protocols they were trained in, deploying exactly the kind of sophisticated equipment they believe will overcome tactical problems. Through their feeds, they watch Kane's technical specialists work with professional precision, each team implementing textbook-perfect solutions to what they perceive as straightforward electronic warfare challenges. Reeves, Kane's voice carries barely controlled fury across their tactical frequency. You think some clever tricks with electronics will stop professional operators? We've got military-grade equipment that can cut through any interference, overcome any technical obstacle. Still thinking in terms of equipment and technical solutions, Thomas replies softly, still believing that superior hardware and professional expertise will automatically translate to tactical advantage. His voice carries that deadly quiet that makes even hardened operators pause, not understanding that sometimes the most sophisticated equipment becomes the most effective vulnerability. A new alert flashes across their screens. Kane's forces beginning to implement what they believe is a coordinated technical counterstrike. Each team deploying advanced systems, each unit activating sophisticated countermeasures, all of it following precise military protocols for electronic warfare response. Their signal analysis teams are trying to map our disruption patterns, James reports, monitoring multiple data feeds, using professional electronic warfare procedures to identify and counter what they think is simple interference. Thomas nods slightly, his attention never wavering from the tactical displays, because that's how military operators are trained to handle technical challenges. You analyze the problem, deploy appropriate countermeasures, and implement professional solutions. His smile doesn't reach his eyes, not realizing that sometimes the most effective trap isn't the one that stops your equipment from working, it's the one that makes your equipment work exactly how someone else wants it to. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's technical teams continue to deploy increasingly sophisticated systems. Each piece of equipment, each countermeasure, each professional solution actually provided Thomas with more precise ways to shape their tactical picture. Sir, one of Kane's technical specialists reports urgently, these interference patterns, they're not random. There's something wrong with how our equipment is responding. It's like everything we deploy just makes the situation more complex. Because they're not fighting our technology, Thomas observes quietly to his team. They're experiencing exactly the kind of systematic disruption designed to make professional operators deploy specific types of equipment, implement specific types of solutions. Lisa studies the tactical displays with growing understanding. Every countermeasure they activate, every system they deploy, just gives us more ways to influence their operation. Yes, Thomas confirms softly, because modern military operations depend entirely on technical coordination. The more sophisticated your equipment, the more you rely on electronic systems, the more vulnerable you become to precisely engineered manipulation. Through their feeds, they watch Kane's forces continue to respond exactly as their training demands. Each team implements professional solutions, each specialist deploys advanced countermeasures, each technical adjustment takes them deeper into patterns Thomas has spent years preparing to exploit. Kane's whole tactical structure is transforming, James observes, watching the displays, from a coordinated military operation into exactly the kind of fragmented, technology-dependent engagement you designed these systems to create. Because that's how professional operators are conditioned to respond, Thomas explains, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that makes his team focus intently. When you encounter electronic warfare, you deploy countermeasures. When systems are compromised, you implement technical solutions. When standard approaches fail, you escalate to more sophisticated equipment. His hands move over the control systems with strategic precision. Not understanding that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who stops your technology from working. It's the one who ensures your technology works exactly how they want it to. Through their surveillance network, Kane's increasingly desperate voice carries clearly, "I want every piece of military-grade equipment we have deployed, full electronic warfare suites, advanced tactical systems, everything. Show Reeves what real professional operators can do." Their entire operation is now completely dependent on their technical systems, Lisa notes, watching the tactical displays. Every solution they implement, every piece of equipment they deploy, just makes them more vulnerable to our prepared responses. Thomas watches with focused attention as his years of preparation continue to achieve their purpose. In NATO operations, he says quietly, we learn something crucial about modern military engagement. The more an opponent depends on sophisticated technology, the more they rely on professional expertise, the more vulnerable they become to precisely engineered strategic disruption. His voice drops lower, carrying that deadly quiet that makes his team straighten unconsciously. Kane, still thinking like a Delta Force operator, believing that superior equipment and professional expertise will automatically overcome any tactical challenge. Through their surveillance systems, they watch Kane's forces continue to deploy increasingly sophisticated technology, each piece of equipment following precise military protocols, each technical solution playing directly into patterns Thomas has spent 5 years preparing for. Not understanding, he continues softly, that sometimes the most effective strategy isn't in preventing your opponent from using their sophisticated equipment. It's in making sure that every way they choose to use it serves your purpose rather than theirs. The evening sun casts long shadows across Rivers Bend's Main Street as Thomas receives urgent reports through his surveillance network. Red Rider units have begun implementing Kane's broader strategy, moving to pressure the entire community that supports Evergreen Valley Farm. They're targeting businesses now, Lisa reports, monitoring multiple data feeds. 3 teams moving systematically through town. Professional coordination, tactical precision. They're making examples of anyone who's helped us. Through their surveillance systems, they watch motorcycle units execute perfectly coordinated intimidation operations. Each team moves with military precision, each action calculated for maximum psychological impact. Mason's supply store, Thompson's equipment depot, Wilson's veterinary clinic. James lists off, tracking thermal signatures across town. They're not just causing random damage, they're systematically isolating us, cutting off every business that provides essential supplies to the farm. Thomas studies the tactical displays with focused attention, watching Kane's forces implement textbook perfect psychological warfare operations. They think they're following standard military doctrine for isolating resistant targets, he observes quietly, actually giving us exactly what we need to activate the next phase of our strategy. Lisa looks up from her monitoring station. You expected this? Planned for them to target the town? In NATO operations, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes his team focus intently, we learned something crucial about community-based resistance. When an opponent tries to isolate you by targeting your support network, they actually create exactly the conditions needed for implementing deeper strategic responses. His hands move over the control systems with practiced efficiency. Kane thinks he's following professional military protocols for breaking community resistance, not realizing that sometimes the most effective defense isn't in protecting individual targets. It's in making sure that when your opponent attacks your support network, they actually activate a prepared response network. Through their surveillance, feeds, they watch Kane's forces continue their systematic pressure campaign. Each business targeted with professional precision, each act of intimidation carefully calculated, each operation following exact military protocols for psychological warfare. "Mr. Reeves," Mason's voice comes through their secure communication channel, disguised as a normal business call. "They just hit my store again. Professional job, knew exactly what inventory to destroy, exactly how to make their point." "Initiate Protocol 3, Thomas responds quietly, "just like we planned. Time to show them why we spent 5 years preparing more than just the farm." What happens next unfolds with choreographed precision. As Red Rider units approach their next targets, they find their carefully planned intimidation disrupted by a series of coordinated actions. Fire sprinklers activate with surgical timing, roads become unexpectedly blocked by malfunctioning equipment, and their tactical communications encounter precisely targeted interference. "What's happening?" Kane's voice carries growing frustration across their monitored frequencies. "Report status on town operations." "Sir," one of his unit commanders responds, "we're encountering systematic disruption across all targets. Can't maintain tactical cohesion, can't coordinate between teams. It's like the whole town is working against us." "Because it is," Thomas replies softly on their frequency. 5 years of patient preparation, teaching people to protect themselves, without looking like they're protecting themselves. Building a community defense network disguised as ordinary small-town life. Through their surveillance systems, they watch Kane's forces encounter a transformed battlefield. The town they thought to terrorize reveals itself as a carefully prepared defensive position. Every business they targeted has contingency plans in place. Every citizen they threatened has been trained in precise responses. "Sir," James reports from his monitoring station, "their pressure teams are losing tactical cohesion, can't coordinate actions between units. Their entire psychological warfare operation is falling apart." "Because they're thinking like military operators," Thomas observes quietly, "trying to implement standard protocols for breaking community resistance. Not understanding that sometimes the most effective defense isn't in meeting force with force, it's in making sure that when force is applied, it encounters precisely prepared responses." Lisa monitors multiple data streams, watching Kane's forces encounter increasingly sophisticated resistance across town. Every business they target, every person they threaten, everyone seems to know exactly how to respond, exactly what countermeasures to implement. 5 years of careful preparation, Thomas confirms softly, teaching people to protect themselves while appearing to focus only on normal business operations, building a community-wide strategic response network disguised as ordinary small-town cooperation. Through their feeds, they watch Kane's professional operators encounter increasingly coordinated resistance. Each attempt at intimidation meets precisely prepared countermeasures. Each act of pressure triggers carefully planned responses. Each operation meant to isolate the farm actually reveals another layer of community-wide strategic preparation. "Reeves!" Kane's voice carries barely controlled fury across their tactical frequency. "Whatever elaborate network you've built won't save you. I've got more forces coming, more resources to deploy. Every person who helps you, every business that supports you, they'll all learn what it costs to stand against us." "No," Thomas replies, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that makes even his own team focus intently. "You just learned your second tactical lesson. Thought you could isolate us by attacking the community. Instead, You gave us justification to show you why we spent 5 years preparing everyone for this moment. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces encounter a transformed operational environment. The town they thought to terrorize into submission reveals itself as a carefully prepared strategic position. Every business they targeted has contingency plans in place. Every citizen they threatened has been trained in precise responses. Every attempt at isolation actually activates another layer of prepared resistance. "Sir," one of Kane's unit commanders reports urgently, "we've lost tactical cohesion completely. Can't coordinate between teams, can't maintain operational security. It's like we're fighting the whole town." "Because you are," Thomas responds. On their frequency, 5 years of patient preparation, teaching people to protect themselves without looking like they're protecting themselves. Building a community defense network disguised as ordinary small-town life. The afternoon sun climbs higher over River's Bend as Kane's forces retreat to regroup. Their psychological warfare campaign transformed into a demonstration of their own vulnerabilities. Thomas stands in the newly secured town center, watching thermal images of Red Rider units pulling back to their staging area. "They'll escalate again," Mason observes, watching motorcycle units withdraw under the cover of tactical confusion. "Come back harder." "Yes," Thomas agrees softly. "Kane's pride demands it now. We've shown him 2 things he never expected, that we can defend ourselves and that the community stands together." His voice drops lower. "Now he'll commit his full force, try to overwhelm us with superior numbers." "And then?" Mason asks, though his tone suggests he already suspects the answer. "Then," Thomas's smile doesn't reach his eyes as he watches Kane's forces retreat. He learns why some targets aren't what they appear to be, why some skills never fade, why some lessons about precision and patience best learned before it's too late. The afternoon light catches his profile as he coordinates the town's recovery operations, and for a moment Mason sees past the quiet farmer to something else. Someone who hasn't forgotten how to end conflicts decisively. Someone who's learned that sometimes the best way to protect peace is to be very, very good at the calculated application of force. The Red Riders thought to terrorize a simple farming community. Instead, they've awakened something that should have stayed buried in the shadows of old wars. Sheriff Wilson stands in Thomas's command center, his experienced law enforcement eyes seeing past the agricultural monitoring equipment to the sophisticated intelligence operation hidden beneath. Multiple screens display real-time surveillance data, communications intercepts, and tactical analyses that would impress military command centers. The morning's failed intimidation campaign against Rivers Bend has forced Thomas to reveal another layer of his long-term preparation. 5 years, Wilson says quietly, watching thermal imaging of Red Rider forces regrouping at their staging area. 5 years of building this right under everyone's nose. Every piece of farm equipment doubled as surveillance gear, every routine, delivery establishing intelligence networks, every agricultural improvement hiding tactical capabilities. Thomas adjusts several monitoring systems with strategic precision, his hands moving over equipment that has waited years for this moment. Kane's pressure campaign gave us what we needed, justification to activate everything openly. Now we can show him exactly what he's really fighting. Lisa enters with fresh intelligence reports, her movements carrying the professional efficiency of someone long trained for this moment. Confirmation from our transport network. Red Riders are calling in reinforcements from 3 states. Satellite imaging shows vehicle convoys moving along our predicted approach routes. They're bringing in serious hardware. Expected, Thomas replies softly. Through his surveillance network, he tracks multiple Red Rider communications channels, each revealing another piece of their escalating response. Kane's pride won't let him back down now. He'll commit everything he has try to overwhelm us. With superior numbers and firepower, James approaches with a tablet displaying additional data streams. Our regional teams are in position, supply caches activated, medical stations prepared, evacuation routes secured. Everything you planned for is ready. Wilson studies the tactical displays with growing understanding. What looks like routine agricultural data reveals itself as a comprehensive battlefield preparation system. Crop moisture sensors double as motion detectors. Irrigation control. Systems provide interlocking fields of fire. Even the carefully maintained GPS mapping of field operations serves multiple strategic purposes. The agricultural consulting network, Wilson realizes, all those meetings with other farms, those regional cooperation initiatives, they weren't just about farming efficiency. Information networks work best when they look like something else, Thomas confirms, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that speaks of lessons learned in darker places. Every delivery driver reporting routine observations, every equipment operator noting unusual activities, every farmer sharing what they've seen on their land. 5 years of building a surveillance system that looked like normal small-town life. Lisa's tablet chimes with incoming data. Kane's forces are probing our secondary positions, testing responses, looking for weaknesses. But they're seeing only what we want them to see. Through his command systems, Thomas watches Red Rider reconnaissance teams encounter precisely the resistance he planned for them to find. Each probe reveals another layer of his preparation. Each tactical response demonstrates another capability. He's built into the farming operation. Your people, Wilson observes, watching the coordinated defense unfold. They're not just farm workers, are they? Everyone serves multiple purposes, Thomas replies. Lisa's agricultural engineering degree covers her expertise in surveillance systems. James's equipment maintenance background masks his tactical communications experience. Every key employee was chosen not just for their agricultural skills, but for capabilities that would be needed when this day came. The command center's main screen shifts to satellite imagery, showing more Red Rider reinforcements approaching from multiple directions. Kane's voice crackles through their monitored communications. I want everything we have moving within our tactical gear, heavy weapons, overwhelming force. Time to show Reeves what real power looks like. Thomas's smile doesn't reach his eyes as he makes precise adjustments to their surveillance coverage. Kane still thinks he's fighting a farmer who's learned some tactical tricks. He doesn't understand what 5 years of patient preparation really means. Lisa approaches with new intelligence summaries. Their command structure is shifting. Kane's bringing in his elite units, the ones he uses for his most serious operations. Professional equipment, military-grade hardware, tactical experience. Good, Thomas replies softly. Pride makes men predictable, makes them escalate exactly as planned. His hands move over the control systems with practiced efficiency. Kane thinks he's bringing overwhelming force to a tactical engagement, actually walking into a strategic trap 5 years in the making. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces gathering for what they believe will be a decisive assault. But each unit they deploy, each position they establish, each tactical advantage they think they're creating, plays directly into the deeper strategy Thomas has prepared for. You're not just defending, Wilson realizes, watching the pattern emerge across multiple tactical displays. You're shaping the battlefield, controlling how they deploy, influencing where they commit their forces. Kane's running his operation like a tactical commander, Thomas confirms quietly, thinking about firepower, positioning, direct engagement, not seeing the strategic level, not understanding that every move he makes has been anticipated and prepared for years in advance. The command center systems track multiple Red Rider communications channels as Kane deploys his gathered forces. Each transmission reveals another piece of their operational plan. Each movement demonstrates another assumption about what they're facing. They still don't understand what they're really fighting, Lisa observes, monitoring the incoming data streams. No, Thomas agrees, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that makes his team focus intently. They think they're dealing with a defensive position that needs to be overwhelmed. Don't realize they're engaging with something that's been actively hunting them for 5 years, gathering intelligence, preparing evidence, documenting activities. Through their surveillance network, Kane's increasingly frustrated voice carries. And clearly, I want every approach covered, every exit point watched. No one gets in or out without our permission. Time to show Reeves what real siege operations look like. He still thinks this is just about the farm, Wilson observes, watching Red Rider units establish their perimeter. Don't realize you've been building something much bigger? Yes, Thomas confirms softly. Because sometimes the most effective strategy isn't in winning the immediate battle, it's in making sure that when the battle comes, it serves a larger purpose. His hands move over the control systems with measured precision. Kane thinks he's preparing to teach us about power, actually walking into a lesson about the difference between tactical thinking and strategic understanding. Through their surveillance systems, they watch Kane's forces continue their build-up, each unit moving with professional precision to establish what they believe are tactically superior positions. None of them realize that every move they make, every advantage they think they're creating, has been carefully orchestrated by someone who spent 20 years ensuring that when he moved his forces, they only needed to move once. Movement at the south entrance, Lisa reports suddenly, monitoring new thermal signatures. 3 vehicles approaching town, not Red Rider patterns, different tactical profile. Thomas adjusts the surveillance feeds, studying the new arrivals with focused attention. Kane's bringing in his specialist teams, he observes quietly. Former military contractors, professional intimidation experts, the ones he uses when motorcycle gangs aren't enough. Through their systems, they watch 3 black SUVs enter Rivers Bend, their movement patterns speaking of serious tactical training. Each vehicle positions itself with professional precision, their occupants deploying with military coordination. They're setting up for systematic intimidation operations, James notes, his military experience helping him read the tactical signatures. These aren't just thugs, they're professionals who understand psychological warfare. Yes, Thomas confirms, softly. Kane's escalating exactly as predicted. When basic intimidation fails, you bring in specialists. When community resistance emerges, you deploy experts in breaking that resistance. His hands move over the control systems with measured efficiency. Not realizing that sometimes the most effective defense isn't in resisting pressure, it's in making sure that pressure triggers precisely prepared responses. Mason's voice comes through their secure network. They're starting with the bank. 3 men in expensive suits, very professional, very precise, making it clear that working with certain farmers could affect our loan status. Perfect, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that deadly quiet that makes his team focus intently. Initiate Protocol 4. Time to show them why we spent years preparing the financial sector. What happens next demonstrates another layer of Thomas's strategic preparation. As Kane's financial warfare specialists attempt to pressure the bank, they encounter precisely prepared resistance. Loan documents reveal complex international backing, property titles show sophisticated legal protection, financial structures demonstrate layers of strategic preparation that transform simple intimidation into potential federal banking violations. Sir, one of Kane's specialists reports urgently, the bank's financial structure, it's not what we expected. Every account we try to pressure, every transaction we attempt to disrupt triggers automatic federal oversight protocols. Through their surveillance network, They watch Kane's professional operators encounter another kind of resistance. Not physical opposition, but precisely prepared legal and financial countermeasures that turn their own pressure tactics against them. They're shifting targets, Lisa reports, tracking multiple teams through town, moving to pressure supply chains, trying to cut off essential deliveries to the farm and supporting businesses. Yes, Thomas agrees quietly. Following standard military doctrine for systematic isolation, when direct financial pressure fails, you target logistics. When banking intimidation doesn't work, you disrupt supply lines. His smile doesn't reach. His eyes, not understanding that sometimes the most effective counter isn't in maintaining your supply chains, it's in making sure that when someone tries to cut them, they expose themselves to precisely prepared consequences. Wilson watches the tactical displays with growing comprehension as another layer of Thomas's strategy reveals itself. Every delivery route has redundant alternatives. Every supply chain has prepared backups. Every logistical system has been carefully designed to appear vulnerable while actually being remarkably resilient. The transportation network, he realizes, all those alternate delivery routes we thought were just about agricultural efficiency. Strategic depth works best when it looks like something else, Thomas confirms, adjusting several monitoring systems. Every trucking company reporting unusual activities, every warehouse monitoring suspicious patterns, every shipping route designed to reveal hostile interference. 5 years of building a logistics intelligence network disguised as normal business operations. Through their feeds, they watch Kane's forces encounter increasingly sophisticated resistance across every sector they target. Each attempt at pressure reveals another layer of preparation. Each act of intimidation triggers another set of prepared responses. Each operation, meant to isolate the farm, actually activates another element of community-wide strategic coordination. Sir, James reports, studying new data streams, they're shifting again, moving to pressure municipal services, water, power, communications, trying to use infrastructure control as leverage. Standard escalation protocol, Thomas observes softly. When direct pressure fails, when financial warfare doesn't work, when supply chain disruption proves ineffective, you target essential services. His hands move over the control systems with practiced efficiency, not realizing that sometimes the most effective defense isn't in maintaining your infrastructure. It's in making sure that when someone tries to control it, they encounter precisely prepared alternatives. Lisa monitors multiple feeds as Kane's teams attempt to leverage infrastructure control, but each system they target reveals another layer of preparation. Redundant power supplies disguised as agricultural equipment, alternate water systems, masked as irrigation infrastructure, backup communications networks hidden within normal farm operations. Reeves! Kane's voice carries growing desperation across their tactical frequency. You think some clever preparation will save you? I've got teams targeting every aspect of your operation, specialists pressuring every support system you have. Still thinking tactically, Thomas replies, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that makes even his own people focus intently. Still believing that enough pressure, applied systematically enough, will eventually find a vulnerability. His voice drops lower, not understanding that sometimes the most effective strategic preparation isn't in protecting against pressure. It's in making sure that when pressure is applied, it reveals exactly who's applying it and why. Through their surveillance network, they watch Kane's forces continue their systematic attempts to isolate and pressure the community. But each operation they launch, each tactic they employ, each pressure point they target, actually serves to document and expose their broader criminal enterprise. You're not just defending the community, Wilson realizes, watching the pattern emerge across multiple displays. You're using their own pressure campaign to build a comprehensive case against their entire organization. Yes, Thomas confirms quietly. Because sometimes the most effective response to systematic intimidation isn't in resisting it. It's in making sure that when your opponent applies pressure, they actually build the evidence for their own destruction. His hands move over the control systems with measured precision. Kane thinks he's conducting a sophisticated pressure campaign, actually documenting exactly the kind of systematic criminal enterprise that federal prosecutors dream about. As the Red Riders dig deeper into their own trap, Thomas's team moves to the next phase of their operation. "Lisa," Thomas says, his voice calm, "trigger phase 3. Lisa nods and taps several keys, initiating the next layer of their plan. Across the town, automated systems come to life. Streetlights flicker strategically, drawing Kane's men towards seemingly undefended alleys and streets, only to find themselves boxed in by malfunctioning barriers or blocked exits. Drones lift off silently from hidden launch pads on farms and rooftops, their cameras broadcasting every move the Red Riders make to the command center. Sheriff Wilson steps closer to the monitors, watching in awe. "You're not just countering them, you're funneling them." "Exactly," Thomas replies. "They've reached the point of overextension. They think they're tightening a noose around us, but in reality, they're being drawn into a chokehold of their own design. Their movements are predictable now, and predictability is a fatal flaw." On the surveillance feeds, Kane's frustration boils over. "Why do I feel like we're being herded?" He snarls into his radio. "I want our units regrouped now. Pull back and reassess. We're not moving until we find the weak point in this operation." But Kane's retreat won't save him. Thomas turns to Lisa. "Activate gridlock." With a few commands, Lisa reroutes traffic lights in neighboring towns, creating gridlock on every major route Kane's reinforcements are using. Convoys grind to a halt on highways, their paths blocked by seemingly unrelated accidents, road construction, and stalled vehicles. Local law enforcement, subtly tipped off by anonymous reports, begins conducting vehicle inspections, further delaying the reinforcements. Kane's second-in-command radios in, panic seeping into his tone. "Boss, our reinforcements are stuck. Every route is a mess. We can't get them here in time." Kane grips his radio, his knuckles white. "Then we use what we have. Push harder. Find Reeves and end this." Back in the command center, Thomas watches as Kane's remaining forces, now fragmented and demoralized, attempt to regroup. He knows this is the moment to strike. "Mason," he says, "deploy the second line." Mason nods, his expression hard. Moments later, the town's defenders, ordinary citizens who had spent years training in secret, move into position. Farmers armed with non-lethal weapons flank the riders, cutting off escape routes. Shop owners use handheld jammers to disable the communications of Kane's men. Even children playing on sidewalks are part of the act, innocently leaving obstacles like overturned trash bins in key paths. It all looks like the random chaos of small-town life, but every move is meticulously planned. Sheriff Wilson, still in awe of the operation, shakes his head. "You've turned the entire town into a battlefield, but it doesn't look like one." "That's the point," Thomas says. "The Red Riders can't escalate without looking like monsters. They'll either retreat or self-destruct under the weight of their own aggression." On the screen, Kane's elite specialists are met with further resistance. At the bank, a hidden legal team emerges, complete with federal oversight agents who had been waiting for this moment. At the town's supply hubs, unassuming truckers reveal themselves as undercover operatives, documenting every move Kane's men make. As the walls close in, Kane's desperation reaches a breaking point. "Reeves," he shouts over the open frequency, his voice crackling with rage. "You think you've won? You think this little game of yours will stop me?" Thomas finally speaks directly to him, his tone calm but carrying the weight of 5 years of preparation. "Kane, you've already lost. You just haven't realized it yet. Your forces are scattered. Your reinforcements are stuck. Every move you've made has been documented and fed to the authorities. You're not running an operation. You're the centerpiece of an indictment. Silence falls over the radio for a long moment. Then Kane's voice returns, low and venomous. You think I'll just surrender? No, Thomas replies, his voice colder now. But you will. Not because of me, but because your men are starting to realize they're following a losing leader. You've pushed them too far, and now they're seeing the cracks in your armor. All it takes is one defection, one man turning evidence, and the whole house of cards collapses. In the field, some of Kane's men begin hesitating, their movements slower, their formations less tight. Whispers of doubt ripple through the ranks as they see how every move they've made has been countered. Lisa looks up from her console. Thomas, local news stations are starting to pick up the story. Anonymous tips are flooding in, videos, photos, evidence of what the riders have been doing. It's going viral. Good, Thomas says. Let the world see who they really are, and let Kane see that his reign of terror ends here. The town's final move is set into motion. As night falls, the riders find themselves surrounded. Their escape routes cut off, their resources drained. Kane, defiant to the end, rallies his remaining men for one last push. But when the dust settles, it's not the riders who stand victorious. It's the people of River's Bend, united, prepared, and unbroken. And as Kane is finally apprehended, Thomas steps into the moonlit town square, his quiet resolve a testament to the power of patience, precision, and a community that refused to be cowed. You never stood a chance, Thomas says softly, watching as Kane is led away in cuffs. Some battles aren't fought for survival. They're fighting to make sure people like you never rise again. Kane's forces, now battered and confused, fall deeper into the trap. Thomas leans against the command center console, his gaze fixed on the map overlay showing real-time troop movements and operational feedback. Each red marker representing the Red Riders seems to move predictably, like pieces on a chessboard. They're on schedule, Lisa says, adjusting the display to show a new set of coordinates. Their elite units are converging on what they think are critical points of our infrastructure, but every move they make is pulling them into tighter choke points. That's because we designed it that way, Thomas replies, his voice steady. They think they're identifying weak spots. What they don't realize is that those weaknesses are bait. At the outskirts of River's Bend, the first wave of reinforcements arrives. Red Rider convoys filled with vehicles bristling with weapons and personnel. The growl of engines echoes through the surrounding fields, a stark contrast to the tranquil farmland that stretches out in every direction. Yet, as they advance deeper into the town, their arrogance begins to falter. The roads they expect to traverse are littered with seemingly mundane obstacles, disabled tractors, overturned supply trailers, and hay bales. What should be minor inconveniences instead become tactical nightmares, forcing them into narrow detours that bottleneck their forces. Meanwhile, the townsfolk, coordinated through encrypted communication systems disguised as simple farming apps, execute their roles with precision. From shop owners to delivery drivers, every citizen plays a part in the unfolding defense. Farmers use drones, originally intended for crop monitoring, to track enemy movements. Warehouse workers accidentally delay unloading supply trucks, subtly sabotaging the Red Riders' logistics. Even the children have their part, feeding false rumors into local chatter networks designed to misdirect and confuse. Inside the command center, Mason steps closer to the surveillance screens. Thomas, their movements are starting to overlap with the secondary traps. If they push forward another few miles, they'll trigger Phase 2, Thomas finishes, glancing at Wilson. The sheriff, still struggling to process the depth of the operation, shakes his head. Phase 2? There's more? Thomas smirks faintly. Sheriff, everything we've done so far has been defensive. Now we start taking the fight to them. The signal is given, and the entire town shifts from defense to counterattack. Pre-placed roadblocks, disguised as farm equipment, spring to life. Modified irrigation systems release blinding clouds of mist, creating natural smoke screens that obscure visibility. Electrical systems in key areas flicker, momentarily plunging streets into darkness, adding to the chaos. At the town's main square, the Red Riders encounter something they never expected. Townsfolk armed, not with traditional weapons, but with overwhelming precision. Farmers use repurposed tools, grappling hooks, chains, even combine harvester claws to disable vehicles. Industrial machinery reconfigured into mobile barricades forces the Red Riders into smaller, more vulnerable groups. Above them, surveillance. Drones equipped with non-lethal countermeasures, high-pitched sound emitters, flashing lights and water cannons descend like a swarm of angry wasps. The Red Riders' specialized equipment, so effective in previous campaigns, becomes useless in the face of these unpredictable tactics. Lisa reports with barely concealed satisfaction. Their comms are in complete disarray. Every channel is being jammed or redirected. They can't even coordinate retreat. They'll fall back to their staging area, Thomas says calmly. Exactly where we want them. Unbeknownst to Kane, his staging area, a previously unassuming warehouse outside of River's Bend, has been under surveillance for months. Through hidden sensors and cameras, Thomas and his team have documented every illicit transaction, every weapons shipment, and every communication with larger criminal networks. Now, with the Red Riders retreating in disarray, Thomas gives the next order. Activate Protocol 5. At his command, pre-planted devices hidden in the warehouse activate. First, power is cut, plunging the site into darkness. Then, smoke grenades ignite, disorienting the retreating forces. Automated alarms, designed to mimic federal law enforcement warnings, blare through the air, sowing panic among Kane's men. Simultaneously, Thomas sends a pre-packaged data file to federal authorities. It contains everything they've gathered: financial records, video evidence of criminal activity, intercepted communications, and a detailed timeline of the Red Riders' operations. Sheriff Wilson's eyes widen as he reads the header of the transmission. You're not just turning them back, you're handing them over on a silver platter, Thomas nods. When the feds roll in, they'll find everything they need to dismantle Kane's network permanently. We're not just winning today. We're ending this for good. But Kane, unwilling to accept defeat, makes one last desperate play. Flanked by his most loyal enforcers, he pushes through the chaos, heading straight for the farm that started it all. His convoy cuts through back roads, avoiding the main routes, hoping to catch Thomas off guard. Sir, Kane's moving toward the primary farmstead, Lisa reports, her voice tense. Thomas doesn't flinch. Let him come. At the farm, the final trap is already in place. As Kane's convoy arrives, they're greeted by an eerily quiet scene. The fields are empty, the equipment dormant, and the farmhouse dark. It's a ghostly calm that unnerves even the most hardened enforcers. Kane steps out of his vehicle, his fury palpable. Reeves, you think you can hide from me? You think you've won? From the shadows, Thomas steps forward, calm and composed. He's unarmed, but his presence is enough to make even Kane hesitate. You've already lost, Kane, Thomas says, his voice low but firm. You just don't know it yet. Before Kane can respond, the farm comes alive. Hidden floodlights illuminate the area, blinding his men. From the barn, heavily armed federal agents emerge, their weapons trained on the Red Riders. Overhead, helicopters circle, their searchlights cutting through the night. Thomas steps aside as the lead federal agent approaches. Mr. Reeves, we'll take it from here. As Kane is cuffed and led away, he glares at Thomas. This isn't over. Thomas meets his gaze, unshaken. It was over the moment you underestimated us. In the weeks that follow, River's Bend returns to its peaceful rhythm. The town, once seen as vulnerable, now stands as a symbol of resilience and community strength. Sheriff Wilson visits Thomas at the farm, where life has resumed as normal. You know, Reeves, you could have done a lot of things with those skills, of yours, but you chose this. Why? Thomas looks out over the fields, his expression thoughtful. Because this is what's worth protecting. Not just the land, but the people. And sometimes, to protect peace, you have to remind the world that you're capable of far more than they think. As the sun sets over River's Bend, the town stands united, stronger than ever. And somewhere, in the shadows of his quiet farm life, Thomas remains ready, just in case peace ever needs protecting again. Though the battle has been won and the Red Riders dismantled, the fight leaves scars on River's Bend. At the local diner, conversations shift uneasily between celebration and concern. The townsfolk share a quiet understanding that their victory, while monumental, has drawn attention from others who might see River's Bend as a target or an opportunity. Sheriff Wilson, sitting with a cup of coffee at the counter, overhears the chatter. "You really think they'll come back?" asks one of the younger farmers, his brow furrowed. "They'll think twice," Wilson replies, though his voice lacks conviction. "But just in case, we'll be ready." The sheriff finishes his coffee and heads to the Reeves farm. He finds Thomas repairing a drone, its rotors damaged during the confrontation. Lisa is nearby, cataloguing equipment and drafting protocols for future emergencies. The farmhouse, once a quiet retreat, now hums with activity, a hub of preparedness and innovation. "We won, Reeves," Wilson says, crossing his arms as he watches Thomas work. "So why doesn't it feel like it?" Thomas glances up, his expression unreadable. "Because victory doesn't mean the fight is over. It just means we've bought time." Wilson leans against the barn wall, sighing. "You ever get tired of always looking over your shoulder?" Thomas pauses, considering the question. "It's not about fear, Sheriff. It's about responsibility. This town trusted me, and I won't let them down." While the Red Riders' leadership is dismantled, Kane proves more resourceful than expected. During his transfer to a high-security facility, a convoy is ambushed by unknown assailants. The news spreads quickly. Kane is missing. Back at the Reeves farm, Lisa bursts into the command center, a tablet in hand. "Thomas, you're going to want to see this." The screen displays grainy footage of the ambush, the attackers clad in black, their tactics precise and efficient. "This wasn't a random jailbreak," Lisa says. "These people knew what they were doing." Thomas studies the footage in silence. Finally, he speaks. "Kane's not done. He has allies we didn't account for." "What do we do?" Lisa asks, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "We stay ready," Thomas replies, "and we find out who's backing him." Realizing the potential for future threats, Thomas and the townsfolk take steps to fortify River's Bend. The local high school gym becomes the center of a new training program, where volunteers learn self-defense, emergency response, and tactical coordination. Farmers and mechanics collaborate to create multi-purpose vehicles, blending agricultural tools with defensive capabilities. Mason takes charge of recruiting and training, his military background proving invaluable. "We're not turning this town into a fortress," he tells the group during a training session, "but we are making sure no one thinks we're easy pickings." The townsfolk respond with determination. What began as a quiet farming community is evolving into a model of resilience and adaptability, a place where everyone contributes to the greater good. One evening, as Thomas walks through the fields, he notices something unusual. A small drone hovering near the edge of his property. It's sleek and silent, far more advanced than anything the townsfolk use. Thomas approaches cautiously, but before he can act, the drone drops a small package and vanishes into the night. Inside the package is a single note, handwritten and unsigned. "This isn't over. You've made enemies you can't see." Thomas takes the note to Lisa, who scans it for any hidden messages or tracking devices. Finding none, she looks at him. It's a warning. It's a promise, Thomas corrects, his jaw tightening. They're testing us, seeing if we'll let our guard down. What do we do? Lisa asks. Thomas's gaze hardens. We show them that Rivers Bend isn't just a town, it's a community that fights back. Recognizing the need for broader support, Thomas reaches out to other small communities that have faced similar threats. He establishes a network of rural towns and villages, sharing strategies, resources, and intelligence. This alliance, dubbed the Silent Shield, operates discreetly, using encrypted communication channels and decentralized leadership to avoid detection. Lisa spearheads the technical side, creating a secure app that allows members to report suspicious activity and coordinate responses. Mason travels between towns, training locals and fostering unity. Rivers Bend becomes the heart of this growing movement, its transformation serving as an inspiration to others. The town's resilience spreads like wildfire, and soon the Silent Shield encompasses dozens of communities, each standing stronger together than they ever could alone. Months later, the inevitable happens. Kane resurfaces, this time as the face of a new organization, one that operates in the shadows but exerts influence through intimidation and corruption. His voice, calm and charismatic, reaches Rivers Bend through a broadcast hijack during a town meeting. Thomas Reeves, Kane says, his image flickering on the projector screen. You thought you could stop me, but all you've done is delay the inevitable. You've painted a target on your town, and I intend to collect it. The room falls silent, the weight of Kane's threat pressing down on everyone present. Thomas steps forward, addressing the crowd. We've faced him before, and we'll do it again. But this time, we're not alone. He looks around the room, meeting the eyes of his friends and neighbors. Kane thinks fear will break us, but fear only has power if we let it, and we're done letting people like him control our lives. The room erupts in applause. The townsfolk's resolve shining brighter than ever. As Kane's forces mobilize, Rivers Bend and its allies prepare for the ultimate confrontation. The Silent Shield rallies its members, transforming rural communities into a network of resistance. Each town contributes its unique strengths, from advanced drone technology to specialized farming equipment reconfigured for defensive purposes. The stage is set for a battle that will decide not just the fate of Rivers Bend, but the future of every community that has dared to stand against tyranny. And at the center of it all, Thomas Reeves remains steadfast, a quiet warrior determined to protect the people and the way of life he holds dear. The Silent Shield's growth sparks unexpected developments. As more communities join, they bring not just resources but their own stories of oppression and resistance. One town, Birch Hollow, recounts how they barely survived a coordinated attack by a gang similar to the Red Riders. Another, Ironwood, reveals its success in using wind turbine farms as a power grid and communications hub, offering to connect the network with Rivers Bend. Thomas hosts the first in-person summit of the Silent Shield in Rivers Bend. Representatives from over 20 towns attend, some arriving in caravans equipped with makeshift armor and weaponry. The sight of so many unified communities bolsters morale, but it also underscores the stakes. Mason addresses the crowd. This isn't just about Rivers Bend anymore. It's about proving that small towns, the backbone of this country, aren't weak. We can defend ourselves. Together we're a force no one expects. The summit produces a comprehensive defense plan, combining Rivers Bend's drone systems with Ironwood's power grid and Birch Hollow's ambush tactics. Communication towers are erected across the Silent Shield's territories, ensuring rapid coordination. Kane, aware of the growing resistance, launches a psychological war. His forces infiltrate the outer edges of the Silent Shield's network, spreading disinformation and instigating paranoia. Crops are set ablaze in isolated fields, and communication lines are mysteriously cut. His message is clear. You are not untouchable. Lisa uncovers traces of Kane's interference in encrypted communications. He's planting seeds of doubt, she tells Thomas. If we don't counter this quickly, he'll turn us against each other. Thomas calls an emergency meeting with the Silent Shield leadership. Kane thrives on fear and division, he says. We need to show him that we're united, no matter what. To combat the disinformation, Lisa creates a secure internal network called Haven, accessible only through biometric authentication. Haven becomes the backbone of the Silent Shield's operations, enabling real-time communication and updates. Meanwhile, Mason organizes patrols to protect vulnerable areas. Teams from different towns are paired together, fostering trust and cooperation. The Silent Shield begins to operate not just as a network, but as a unified force. One night, a convoy from Birch Hollow, carrying medical supplies and ammunition, is ambushed en route to River's Bend. The survivors limp into town, their vehicles riddled with bullet holes. It was him, one of them says, trembling. Kane was there. He's coming for all of us. The attack sends shockwaves through the Silent Shield. Some towns consider withdrawing, fearing the cost of defiance. At a town meeting, tensions boil over. We can't win this, shouts a farmer. We're just farmers and tradespeople. He has armies. Thomas steps forward, his voice calm but firm. Kane wants us to believe we're powerless. But look around you. Every person here has already fought back in some way. Every person here has already proven that we're not just farmers. We're protectors, and protectors don't abandon their own. His words resonate, and the crowd regains its resolve. But Thomas knows the battle ahead will test them all like never before. Kane's forces move swiftly, targeting Silent Shield outposts in coordinated strikes. But the Silent Shield is ready. Using drones and hidden surveillance, they intercept Kane's movements, forcing him into a prolonged battle of attrition. River's Bend becomes the epicenter of the resistance, its fields transformed into a labyrinth of defensive structures. Old barns are fortified into watchtowers, irrigation systems repurposed to create barriers of mud and water. The townsfolk work tirelessly, their determination outweighing their exhaustion. Lisa develops a counter-drone system capable of hacking into enemy devices. During a test run, she successfully commandeers one of Kane's drones, using it to map his encampment. He's closer than we thought, she tells Thomas, showing him the footage. Thomas studies the map, his expression grim. Then it's time to take the fight to him. As dawn breaks, Kane's forces arrive, a convoy of armored vehicles and mercenaries. But they're met with a sight that stops them in their tracks. Hundreds of Silent Shield members, armed and ready, standing shoulder to shoulder in the fields of River's Bend. The battle begins with a thunderous clash. Kane's forces advance, but they're met with a coordinated defense. Traps and obstacles slow their progress, while drones rain down precision strikes. The Silent Shield's tactics, honed through months of preparation, prove devastatingly effective. Mason leads a group of fighters in a flanking maneuver, cutting off Kane's supply lines. Lisa, stationed in the command center, directs operations with uncanny precision, her systems ensuring that every move is calculated and efficient. Thomas, armed with nothing more than a rifle and his unyielding resolve, fights alongside his neighbors. He becomes a symbol of the town's spirit, his presence inspiring those around him to hold the line. As the battle rages, Thomas confronts Kane in the ruins of an old barn. Kane, bloodied but defiant, smirks. You think you've won, Reeves. Do you think this changes anything? Thomas levels his rifle. It changes everything. Kane lunges, but Thomas is ready. The fight is brutal, a clash of sheer willpower. In the end, Thomas emerges victorious, standing over a defeated Kane. The battle ends with Kane's forces in retreat, their leader captured. The Silent Shield, celebrates its hard-earned victory, but the coast is clear. Fields are scorched, buildings damaged, and lives lost. Yet amidst the ruins, a sense of hope prevails. In the weeks following the battle, Rivers Bend and its allies begin to rebuild. The Silent Shield solidifies its presence, ensuring that no community stands alone. Kane is handed over to federal authorities, his reign of terror finally ended. Thomas stands in his fields, now dotted with wildflowers where crops once grew. Lisa joins him, a tablet in hand. "We did it," she says. Thomas nods, his gaze on the horizon. "For now, but we'll stay ready." As the sun sets over Rivers Bend, the town stands stronger than ever, a beacon of resilience, proving that even the smallest voices can defy the loudest tyrants. The aftermath of the battle leaves scars on the land, the people, and their spirits. Rivers Bend is battered but unbroken. Homes need repairs and fields require replanting, but the community's spirit burns brighter than ever. Neighboring towns send caravans loaded with supplies, tools, and volunteers. The Silent Shields Alliance solidifies as more communities pledge their loyalty, inspired by the victory. Mason spearheads the reconstruction effort, rallying workers to rebuild barns, repair irrigation lines, and fortify defenses. His relentless work ethic inspires others, and soon the town hums with the sound of hammers, saws, and laughter. Lisa, however, has her hands full. Her counter-drone system, while effective, had its flaws, and she began refining it into a broader defense network called Sentinel, designed to monitor the entire Silent Shield territory for signs of future threats. "We won't get caught off guard again," she promises Thomas. The victory came with a price. Families bury their loved ones, and memorials are erected across Silent Shield towns. Thomas ensures each name is remembered, carving them into the walls of Rivers Bend's central square. But the emotional toll weighs heavily. Survivors grapple with loss and trauma. The once quiet evenings in Rivers Bend are now filled with uneasy dreams and lingering anxiety. The town hall transforms into a counseling center where trained volunteers help their neighbors process their grief and fear. Thomas himself struggles to reconcile the cost of leadership. Mason finds him one night, sitting by the wildflower-dotted field that was once a battleground. "You did what had to be done," Mason says. Thomas nods, his face lined with exhaustion. "I know, but knowing doesn't make it easier." With Kane gone, the power vacuum he left behind creates new challenges. Smaller gangs and opportunistic warlords begin to vie for dominance in the lawless regions surrounding Silent Shield territory. The Alliance must decide whether to expand its influence or focus inward. At a leadership council meeting, tensions ran high. "We can't stretch ourselves too thin," argues a representative from Birch Hollow. "We barely have enough resources to rebuild," but a young leader from Ironwood, Eli Ward, counters. "If we don't act, someone worse than Kane could rise. We've proven we can fight back. Now we need to ensure no one else has to." The council votes to form the Vanguard, a mobile task force dedicated to protecting vulnerable communities and quelling threats before they reach Silent Shield territory. Mason volunteers to lead the first Vanguard unit alongside fighters from across the Alliance. Even as the Silent Shield rebuilds, whispers of a larger threat begin to emerge. Lisa intercepts fragmented communications from remnants of Kane's network, hinting at a shadowy figure known only as the Broker. This mysterious figure is rumored to have supplied Kane with weapons, technology, and mercenaries, and may now be seeking revenge for his downfall. Lisa shares her findings with Thomas. "Whoever the Broker is, they're smart. They've stayed in the shadows, pulling strings without ever showing their face." Thomas's expression hardens. "Then we bring them into the light." As Sentinel comes online, Lisa suggests an ambitious new project, connecting every Silent Shield town through a shared communications network. Dubbed the People's Network, it will allow instant communication, resource sharing, and even education across the Alliance. The project faces logistical challenges, but towns rally behind the idea. Engineers from Ironwood and coders from distant cities, inspired by the Silent Shield's resilience, volunteer their expertise. Within months, the first phase of the network goes live, bringing a sense of unity and progress. One evening, Lisa demonstrates the network's capabilities to a group of children in Rivers Bend. She pulls up a live feed of a town hundreds of miles away, where a teacher waves to the screen. The children's eyes light up with wonder, a reminder that even in the bleakest times, hope and innovation can thrive. As the months pass, life in Rivers Bend begins to settle. The fields are replanted, the barns repaired, and the people find moments of joy amidst their recovery. Yet, Thomas remains vigilant. He patrols the outskirts of town, scanning the horizon for signs of danger. One day, a traveler arrives with news of a town far beyond the Silent Shield's borders. "They're calling for help," he says. "Their crops are failing, and raiders are closing in." Thomas gathers the council. "We've built something incredible here, but if we turn our backs on those in need, we risk becoming no better than the ones we fought against." The council agrees to send aid, marking the beginning of the Silent Shield's transformation from a defensive alliance to a beacon of hope for the entire region. Late one night, Lisa intercepts an encrypted message that sends a chill down her spine. It's addressed to her personally. The message reads, "You think you've won, but you've only just begun to play the game." "The broker." She rushes to Thomas, her hands trembling. "He knows who we are." Thomas reads the message, his jaw tightening. "Then it's time we find out who he is." Lisa nods, already working to trace the message. But deep down, they both know the battle against Cain was only the beginning, and the Silent Shield must prepare for an even greater storm. Despite the looming threat, Rivers Bend thrives. The town's children play in the rebuilt streets, their laughter a testament to the community's enduring spirit. The wildflowers in the old battlefield bloom brighter each spring, a symbol of renewal. Thomas stands at the edge of his field, watching the sunrise. Lisa approaches, holding a tablet displaying Sentinel's latest scan. "Everything's quiet," she says. "For now," Thomas replies, his voice steady. "But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The Silent Shield's legacy grows, a shining example of how ordinary people, united by hope and determination, can stand against the darkest forces and prevail. As the Silent Shield grows into a symbol of resistance and hope, tensions within the Alliance begin to surface. Each town in the Alliance has its own unique challenges and priorities. Rivers Bend focuses on agriculture, Ironwood prides itself on technological innovation, and Birch Hollow remains fiercely independent, suspicious of centralized leadership. At a summit of Alliance leaders, a heated debate erupts over the future of governance. Eli Ward from Ironwood proposes the creation of a formal council with elected representatives from each town. "We need structure," he argues. "Without it, we'll fracture the moment the next threat arises." Birch Hollow's leader, Greta Walsh, counters sharply. "Structure means bureaucracy. Bureaucracy slows us down. What we need is flexibility and trust in each community to handle its own affairs." Thomas mediates, advocating for a balance. A council can provide guidance, but it must respect the autonomy of each town. If we're going to grow, we need to grow together. The debate culminates in a compromise, a charter of unity, outlining shared goals and mutual defense, but granting towns the freedom to govern themselves. It's an uneasy truce, but it's a start. Even as Rivers Bend rebuilds, Thomas finds himself increasingly haunted by the decisions he's had to make. He begins to distance himself from the community, spending long hours walking the outskirts of town or sitting alone in the field where the battle took place. One night, Mason confronts him. "You can't keep carrying this alone," he says. "We all made sacrifices. We all have blood on our hands, but you gave us hope when we had none. That's not a burden, it's a gift." Thomas shakes his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if it's not enough? What if the next fight is the one that breaks us?" Mason places a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll fight it together, like we always have." Lisa's work to uncover the broker's identity takes her deeper into a web of secrets. She discovers fragments of financial transactions leading to offshore accounts, shell corporations, and encrypted communications. The broker's network is vast, and it becomes clear that Kane was only one of many warlords. Under their influence, one breakthrough comes when Lisa intercepts a shipment of advanced drones meant for a rival gang. Among the cargo is a prototype, unlike anything she's seen before, sleek, silent, and deadly. Embedded in its programming is a cryptic signature, Omega Protocol. Lisa shares her findings with Thomas. "This isn't just about us," she says. "The broker is playing a much bigger game. If we don't stop them, the world we're trying to rebuild might never get the chance to stand." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.